Just because you were lucky enough to win young Master Wushuang's armament, you really think you understand armaments very well? Ugly girl, let me tell you, you're still far from it. Hellion Vivian's eyes looked up and met that young lady's eyes. Her thin lips curved, bringing out a severe iciness. I'll say it again. Get out of the way. That young lady wasn't easy to deal with. Seeing that Hellion Vivian didn't give in to her, her face immediately darkened. Eldest sister. Hellion Jiaoer stood by that young lady's side and used a look that said, how could you be so insensible to look at Hellion Vivian? This is the daughter of the Armament Assembly's vice president, Miss Cheng. Shouldn't you be a bit more respectful to her? Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and a mocking smile slowly overflowed from her eyes. That young lady looked at her appearance and was in a bad mood. She sneered. Forget it. This young lady also won't lower herself to her level. Towards this kind of country bumpkin who hasn't seen many armaments and doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth after occasionally winning one, how much respect do you expect her to have? Little sister Jiaoer, wait until you buy that armament from Profound Heavens. You really should let this country bumpkin see it and let her properly know what is called disparity. After hearing Profound Heavens, the smile at the corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth became even wider. When she raised her eyebrows, it also carried a bit of a unique and unknown flavor. Hellion Jiaoer faintly smiled and hypocritically evaded. It's just that we're still discussing. Whether or not we can get it is still not certain. However, it seems that there should be a plan. Little sister Jiaoer, what are you afraid of? The defense division has plenty of money. Moreover, only a good armament can match your innate talent. Cheng patted Hellion Jiaoer's hand and disdainfully swept a glance at Hellion Vivian. Unlike some people who curry favor with others everywhere, but don't have the slightest bit of real talent. I reckon that she hasn't even heard of what Profound Heavens is. If I were Grandmaster Zizun, accepting a disciple like this wouldn't be enough to lose face for me. Cheng's words caused a burst of laughter from all around. Hellion Vivian crossed her arms in front of her chest, her body leaning against the pillar behind her. How should she tell this Miss Cheng that the Profound Heavens that she spoke of was actually opened by her? Well, let's not waste any more time here. Murong Chang Feng faintly cast a glance at Hellion Vivian. His handsome face didn't have the slightest trace of change. You should also return to where you belong. When Cheng heard Murong Chang Feng help Hellion Vivian out of the predicament, there was a burst of discomfort in her heart. Didn't Murong Chang Feng hate this woman the most? What Murong Chang Feng said is right. We completely don't need to waste time on a good-for-nothing. Cheng deliberately misinterpreted Murong Chang Feng's words, smiling appropriately. I heard that she will also participate in the martial chi competition not long after. At that time, we can actually have a good exchange. She must beat this ugly woman until she can't even crawl up. Hellion Vivian didn't respond to her words. People who were familiar with her should know that she was in a hurry. Otherwise, she wouldn't have endured for so long and would have already sent a fist flying over. However, considering that the third prince was still waiting for her, plus if this matter attracted the attention of the four great clans, it would inevitably cause trouble for the third prince. What she disliked the most was to cause trouble for her own business partners. However, having a good exchange in the martial chi competition actually happened to coincide with her thoughts. Woman, your smile is very evil. Chapter 127. Yuan Ming's lazy voice came out from the fantasy space. Hellion Vivian used her mind to communicate with Yuan Ming. Is that so? Of course, it's not like you to hold back like this. Yuan Ming laughed evilly. You shouldn't be planning something, right? Hellion Vivian didn't speak, but the smile on the corner of her mouth revealed her craftiness. However, the young lady named Cheng didn't know Hellion Vivian's thoughts and thought that she was afraid of her, so she proudly raised her thin lips. Hellion Jiaoer also felt that she had vented her anger, and her red lips curved up. Sister Cheng, let's go up first. The people from Profound Heaven will be here soon. It's not good to stand here. Sister Jiaoer is so thoughtful. Cheng casually retracted his gaze from Hellion Wei's body, as if he was looking down on her. My father will also be here in a while. My father is the kind of person who can't stand people who rely on flattery to climb up the ranks. These days, he has been in contact with people from profound heaven. Who knows, maybe he can help Sister Jiao. Helian Jiao smiled, then this younger sister will first thank elder sister. There's no need to thank me between us. Cheng intimately used the hand that was holding the handkerchief to pinch Helian Jiao's face. The two people smiled at each other. They were both extremely good-looking beauties. This kind of curved lips and light smile actually had the meaning of captivating the birds and beasts. The people who stayed in the hotel all looked over, and even the eyes of those young masters emitted a faint luster, thinking that if they could marry such a woman, their lives would be complete. In this way, the slightly tanned Helian Vivian seemed to be somewhat unpresentable. At least in their hearts, she was unpresentable. What they didn't expect was that just after they went to the private room, the person in charge of profound heaven happened to come over. The person in charge was a middle-aged man of average age. He was also Hei's most trusted assistant, Uncle Zhong. When he saw Helian Vivian standing at the door, his originally lukewarm footsteps suddenly quickened. He walked towards Helian Vivian, his voice full of surprise. "Big boss, why are you here?" "I'm here to discuss something." Helian Vivian's voice was indifferent as she looked at the master behind him. Seeing this, Uncle Zhong paused and said, "Big boss, this is Master Cheng, who is cooperating with us this time." During this period of time, Cheng Xiong had been focusing all his attention on the collaboration with Profound Heavens and didn't look at today's armament test. So he didn't think that it was Helian Vivian from the capital. However, what made him surprised was that Profound Heaven's boss was actually a young lady. One must know that in the armament world, this Profound Heavens, from the moment it was established, made many armaments that made people endlessly astonish. Almost every piece of armament was crazily fought over by everyone. Many people said that their family's armaments were almost comparable to the armaments personally made by young Master Wu Shuang. Even some highly respected masters couldn't say whether the armaments made by Profound Heavens were better, or the armaments made by young Master Wu Shuang were better. Even this time, young Master Wu Shuang had agreed to participate in the armament conference because he wanted to see who the boss behind Profound Heavens was. But what made people regretful was that she didn't appear. Even her basic information, whether she was a man or a woman, and how old she was, no one knew. However, everyone had always thought that she was a disciple of some famous master. At the very least, she was born in an aristocratic family, like young Master Wu Shuang's successor. But Cheng Xiong looked at this person in front of him. He hadn't even seen her in the armament world. The more she spoke, the wider the smile at the corners of her mouth became. It was as if a demon had found some fun toy when it was bored. Uncle Zhong's gaze on Cheng Xiong paused. He respectfully replied, "Don't worry, big boss. I know what I should do. Then I'll leave first." Helian Vivian lightly smiled and nodded in Cheng Xiong's direction. Stroking the white cat, she slowly stepped into the long alley. Yuan Ming's deep and shallow laughter was transmitted over. "Woman, you're simply too bad. Acting like this, wouldn't that Miss Cheng and that little sister of yours be stifled to death?" Ha! Chapter 128. What I want is to make their hearts feel stifled. Helian Wei slowly raised her eyes, her thin lips curled into a smile, as handsome and demonic as the devil's, Phoenix Building in, second floor private room. Cheng Xiong brought Uncle Zhong upstairs. After seeing that group of people, he faced Murong Chang Feng and laughed heartily. "Nephew, you also came. How is it? Is Master Tu Laro doing well recently? Is he still looking for that genius disciple he wants to accept? Master's body has always been strong." Murong Chang Feng's voice was very dull. "As for other things, I'm not too clear." Cheng stood at the side with a red face, interrupting, "Father, it's not like you don't know how busy Murong Chang Feng is, yet you still ask him about these things." Cheng Xiong glanced at his own daughter. Regarding her thoughts, he more or less understood. However, even if their Cheng family had a place in the world of armaments, wanting to marry into Prince Murong's Murong Manor was also a social climb within social climb. Therefore, he was very happy that his daughter could interact more with Murong Chang Feng, so he also didn't teach more. Instead, He continued with the previous topic, and directed it towards Uncle Jong. This is Uncle Jong, the manager of Profound Heavens. Their boss is the one who can truly be called amazing. At such a young age, he's already made no less than 10 armaments. If Master Tu Laro saw him, he would definitely change his mind, and no longer look for that whatever genius. Uncle Jong stood at the side, neither servile nor overbearing, and also had the rules of a manager, not too outstanding, but also not too calm. Hearing Uncle Jong's words, he only smiled calmly. Uncle Cheng has seen Profound Heaven's boss. Helian Jiao's eyes lit up. It said that this boss' whereabouts were mysterious, extremely difficult to approach, even his surname and name, no one knew. If she could get through to Profound Heaven, then in the future, she could easily get whatever armaments she wanted. Even if that slut obtained an armament made by young Master Wu Shuang, so what? She still couldn't compare to her. The more Helian Jiao thought, the deeper the smile on her face. She believed that when the time came, with the Defense Division's influence, Profound Heaven's boss wouldn't not give her face. Now, she only needed Uncle Cheng to recommend her. The Helian Jiao raised her head and looked at Cheng Xiong. Cheng Xiong stroked his beard and laughed. I've seen her. For a girl to have such an achievement, her future will be limitless. A girl. Murong Chang Feng's handsome face finally had some ripples, the hand holding the teacup slightly paused. Profound Heaven's boss is a girl? Not only Murong Chang Feng, but even the rest of the aristocratic family's young masters also showed a very surprised expression. They were not unaware of the influence of Profound Heavens. In their minds, the boss of Profound Heavens must be a very powerful old man, or at the very least, a master. However, they did not expect that the boss of Profound Heavens would be a girl. Father, could it be that someone is impersonating him? Cheng Cheng's tone was somewhat sour. Originally, she worshipped the boss of Profound Heavens, just like how she worshipped Master Wu Shuang. However, when she heard that the boss was a girl like herself, there was a very subtle feeling in her heart. Coupled with the fact that Murong Chang Feng's attention was completely attracted, Cheng Cheng was even more uncomfortable, so she had such a prejudiced guess. Uncle Jong listened and raised an eyebrow. Impersonation? According to what Miss Cheng said, I am also an impersonator. I didn't mean that. Cheng Cheng looked at Uncle Jong indifferently. She had always looked down on the servants. He was just a housekeeper, no matter how powerful he was still a servant. Why was he so arrogant? Cheng Xiong naturally knew his daughter's personality. He was afraid that she would offend Uncle Jong, so he quickly reprimanded Cheng Cheng. Cheng don't be unruly. Cheng Cheng stretched her neck and wanted to say something. However, she was slowly interrupted by Uncle Jong. Our Profound Heavens has always been under the control of my boss. Since Miss Cheng is so suspicious of my boss, then there is no need to discuss the matter of cooperation. Vice President Cheng, I will take my leave first. Cheng Xiong didn't expect that the business that he had been talking about for 3 days would be ruined because of 1 or 2 words. Uncle Jong, Cheng is still young. How could she have offended Uncle Jong? Uncle Jong, please speak frankly. You can't just not talk about cooperation because of these trivial matters. Uncle Jong stopped in his tracks and pretended to be humble as he said with a smile, What are you saying, Vice President Cheng? Miss Cheng is the daughter of the Cheng family and I'm just a servant. There's no such thing as offending her. It's just that my boss is a little strange. She loves money, but she will never cooperate with anyone who has offended her. Offend? Cheng Xiong didn't understand and was slightly stunned. When did this old man offend her? He only offended that little girl today. Uncle Jong didn't speak again. Instead, he looked at Cheng Cheng with a deep meaning and continued to leave. Cheng Cheng was unhappy and rudely stopped him. I want to see if you dare to leave. Uncle Jong looked up and smiled. Miss Cheng, what are you trying to do? Are you threatening me? She's just the boss of a martial arts firm, yet she's so cocky. Your boss doesn't want to cooperate, right? Then this young lady will properly remove the claws of the dog she's raising and properly beat her. As Cheng Cheng spoke, she wanted to call someone. Uncle Jong calmly glanced at Cheng Xiong. Vice President Cheng, before our boss left, she wanted me to give you a sentence. Cooperation between martial arts firms is voluntary. This is the rule that President Jing of the Armament Guild personally set. No one is allowed to use force to oppress the weak. Especially as a member of the Armament Guild, you can't abuse your authority even more. Otherwise, you will be forever expelled from the world of martial arts. Vice President Cheng, as the Vice President of the Armament Guild, you shouldn't be unfamiliar with this rule, right? After he finished speaking, Uncle Jong couldn't help but admire the words that his boss had instructed him to say before she left. It was simply like hitting the nail on the head, pressuring Cheng Xiong so that not only did he not dare to make things difficult for him, he also had to respectfully send him back. As expected, Cheng Xiong immediately pulled Cheng Cheng back. His face was filled with anger. Nonsense, Daddy. Chapter 129. When Cheng Xiong heard this, the fire in his heart burned even more fiercely. Ordinarily, he indeed taught his daughter like this. As the vice president of the Armament Association, having a little privilege was natural and proper. However, that was in private. He didn't want her to shout it out in front of so many people. You. Cheng Xiong seemed to be really angry. He pointed to the imperial bodyguard at the side and said, "Go tell Miss to go out less in the future. If she says one more word, go to the ancestral hall at the back of the mountain." Not knowing if it was because the imperial bodyguard's words had passed on, Cheng Cheng's side finally quieted down. Cheng Xiong let out a long sigh. He turned his head and said to Uncle Jong, "This daughter of mine is really too outspoken. Uncle Jong, you must not take it to heart. Vice President Cheng, I just said that this old servant is only a manager." Uncle Jong smiled and said, "It's just that our boss still has some words to say to Vice President Cheng. It's better to be low-key." The smile at the corner of Cheng Xiong's mouth stiffened. He firmly clenched both his hands. This was the first time he was in danger from a little girl whose hair hadn't even fully grown yet. What was even more hateful was that the little girl simply wasn't here. Just by passing on a message, he couldn't even move an inch. Speaking of which, why would that little girl have such a big opinion of his own beloved daughter? Could it be that Cheng had really offended her? Cheng Xiong didn't understand. However, in just a short half an hour, all of his efforts in these past few days had turned into bubbles. Originally, the Cheng family hadn't produced any outstanding armament masters these past few years. On the surface, the Cheng family still looked the same as before. In the armament world, they had a pivotal position. In reality, only he himself knew that the current Cheng family already couldn't be compared to the previous Cheng family. And Profound Heaven's momentum was just right. He looked for Profound Heavens precisely because he wanted to borrow the other party's momentum to shake up the Cheng family. If Profound Heavens didn't cooperate with him, the Cheng family's road would be very difficult to walk. But to have him lower his head to a little girl, he absolutely wouldn't do it. Uncle Jong also saw through Cheng Xiong's thoughts. Early on, the boss didn't agree to cooperate with the Cheng family. It was also because he was talkative. He felt that the Cheng family was an old name and had absolute influence in the armament world. That's why he repeatedly proposed to the boss to let her reconsider. Now it seems that not only is Cheng Xiong unable to teach his own daughter well, even he himself has that kind of superiority feeling that no one is inferior to him. Such a person would not make much of a difference in the business world. Uncle Jong took the hat and put it on his head. He didn't say another word to Cheng Xiong. Just as he walked out of the inn, someone chased after him. "Uncle Jong, wait." It was the Hellion Jiaowa. She was much smarter than Cheng Cheng. At the very least, she didn't show it on her face even though she looked down on these servants. Her shy smile had a hint of gentleness. Uncle Jong was a very smart person and had been a retainer of the He family for 2 generations. Although these young ladies in the capital did not know him, he was very familiar with each and every one of them. This was also because the old master had recently made up his mind to marry the second young master. Oh, no, he wanted the second young master to marry a wife. He could only say that this Hellion Jiaowa was very good at managing herself. When the Hellion Jiaowa saw him stop, she signaled the maidservant beside her to pass the things in her hands to him. Uncle Jong didn't need to look at those things to know what they were. He raised his lips and smiled, but didn't accept them. When the Hellion Jiaoer saw that he didn't accept the banknotes, she wrinkled her eyebrows. Miss, what should we do? That maidservant had never seen someone who didn't accept money. The Hellion Jiaoer secretly scolded that he didn't know how to appreciate kindness. The corner of her mouth hooked up. Uncle Zhong thinks it's too little? Miss Jiaoer misunderstood this old servant's meaning. Uncle Zhong raised his head, the light in his eyes was not weak. Perhaps Miss Hellion Jiaoer doesn't understand our profound heavens. Almost everyone in the armaments world knows that we, profound heavens, don't accept these. The Hellion Jiaoer squeezed the handkerchief in her hand tightly and said, I also don't have any other meaning. I just want to buy an armament personally made by your boss. Money can be discussed. Uncle Zhong laughed. To be able to make our boss personally make an armament, money is one thing, but also cultivation. You don't have to worry about this. Before the Hellion Jiaoer could speak, the maidservant standing next to her opened her mouth, arrogantly carrying a thick sense of pride. My miss is the successor of the Hellion family, a top student at White Academy, a genius that everyone envies. Not to mention these ordinary people, even the armaments aristocratic families in the capital may not be able to win against my miss. Uncle Zhong glanced at that maidservant and suddenly laughed. I forgot to mention the third point, which is also the point that Profound Heavens just added. What? No matter what you say, my miss can afford it. The maidservant looked at the Hellion Jiaoer's face and saw that her eyes were full of praise. The words that came out of her mouth were even more arrogant. Uncle Zhong's voice was steady as he opened his mouth, pausing after each word, arrogant and egotistical. We, Profound Heavens, will not sell anything to her. Hearing this, the maidservant's proud mouth suddenly stiffened, and she couldn't help but look towards the Hellion Jiaoer. Sure enough, the Hellion Jiaoer's face was even uglier than her. That small face that was originally pretending to be friendly, at that moment, became incomparably ferocious. It was as if she was trying to hold back the billowing waves of anger. What the hell? The Hellion Jiaoer didn't flare up at the moment. After Uncle Zhong left, she fiercely threw out the handkerchief in her hand. Miss, don't be angry. That maidservant hurriedly said, Master has already contacted the person in charge of Profound Heavens. This steward definitely doesn't know who you are, so he dares to be so rude to you. Wait until we reach the capital, Master will take the armaments back for you. At that time, we will let this old thing and that whatever boss take a good look at who they have provoked. The Hellion Jiaoer listened to the maidservant's words and took a deep breath, as if relieved a lot. A group of ignorant country bumpkins. Miss is right. At the same time, the maidservant nodded fiercely and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she saved in time. Otherwise, when the Miss's temper flared up, she wouldn't need to keep her arm. The Hellion Jiaoer tidied up her sleeves. Let's go back and wait until we reach the capital. The people of Profound Heavens had eyes but failed to see. Sooner or later, they would regret it. How could they know that the other party wasn't blind, but simply didn't want to sell the armaments to her at all? After a little servant saw Uncle Zhong, he asked, Uncle Zhong, isn't that the second miss of the general's residence? Uncle Zhong glanced at the little servant. Don't ask what you shouldn't ask. The little servant touched the bridge of his nose. I didn't want to ask, I just wanted to ask what she said to you. She looks really beautiful up close. That's still asking. Uncle Zhong's voice was neither slow nor slow. Well, it's about time to go back. Big Boss is also here. She saw Cheng Xiong and was not satisfied with the Cheng family. The little servant's eyes shook. Big Boss? She's here. Where? Chapter 130. She left a long time ago. Uncle Zhong calculated the abacus in his hand. This time, the cost of this trip is not small. Give me all the accounts. The servant's expression was tranquil. I've never seen the Big Boss's appearance. When you first entered Profound Heaven, I already said, don't be curious. Uncle Zhong closed the abacus, as if he had thought of something, turned his head and said, oh, that's right. Pass down the order. Just say that the Big Boss said that in the future, if people from the Defense Division come to buy armaments from us, clearly tell them that they have to pay 10 times the price before we sell them. 10 times. The servant slightly lowered the corners of his eyes. How did the people from the Defense Division provoke the Big Boss? Not only did they want to earn the other party's money, but they also clearly told the other party. This was simply killing the other party without giving the other party a quick death. After the people from the defense division heard this news, they would certainly be angered to death. Uncle Jong smiled and shook his head. That's why I said, no matter who you offend, don't offend our family's boss. Even if she was in class, she could still make armaments under the teacher's eyes, not to mention dealing with these young masters and young ladies who smell like milk. A person who only used a month's time to make a name for herself in the world of armaments. Merely relying on how many armaments she made was useless, it also depended on her brain. In the end, it was these people who looked down on his boss. What's more, his boss also had that kind of identity, the capital's outstanding hedonistic young lady. Everyone wanted to come and step on her foot, so much so that even the people from the Hellion family had removed her name from the family. This kind of person, who could have imagined that she would be profound heaven's boss, the armaments world's most popular armaments master. After he finished speaking, Uncle Jong entered the carriage. He didn't know that just after he left, the remaining servant's eyes flashed with a trace of light. Accompanied by bursts of light coughing, that servant slowly walked into the deserted long alley. His slender pale fingers streaked across the side of his face. An inconspicuous thin layer of skin lightly separated from that originally somewhat healthy complexion of his face. In the end, only a sickly handsome paleness was left. Young master. The black-clothed man floated down and kneeled on the ground with one knee. His eyes slightly raised with a loyal and devoted expression. In the future, this kind of thing should be left to this subordinate to do, your body. It's fine. That person lightly coughed twice. His long sleeves fluttered with a faint medicinal fragrance. His voice was as gentle as jade, completely different from before. The moonlight shone on his chiseled face. Who else could it be other than the young master of an aristocratic family, Jing Wushuang? No one knew that the reason he came to Armament City this time, other than to find an owner for that female-specific armament, the more important reason was that he wanted to meet the boss of Profound Heavens, who was rumored to be very popular. In the end, that person's whereabouts were even more secretive than his own. He had no choice but to disguise himself as a servant of Profound Heavens to approach him. However, after waiting for 2 whole days in Armament City, he still didn't see that so-called boss. However, at least there was still something to be gained. Although Uncle Jong acted cautiously, it was inevitable that he would reveal information about that person during the conversation. For example, even if she is in class, she can still do armaments under the teacher's nose. This meant that the person was not an old master like everyone thought. Instead, he was just a student. And in the Dragon War Empire, there was only one academy located in the capital. That was the White Academy that everyone yearned for. Jing Wushuang lowered his eyes, covering the bits of broken light emitted from inside. He instructed the person on the ground, "Go tell the people at White Academy that I accepted their invitation." Ah! The black-clothed man rarely showed this kind of surprised expression. "Young master, you really want to go to that academy to teach as a teacher?" "Not to teach." Jing Wushuang lightly coughed twice. The smile on the corner of his mouth was still as gentle as jade. "I'm going to be a student." The black-clothed man stared. What? Young master was going to be a student? What kind of joke was this? Even if it was a Supreme Master's armament, it was not necessarily comparable to young master. If he was going to be a student, who would dare to be his teacher? The black-clothed man had a premonition that in the future, White Academy would no longer have such a peaceful day. Going in like this won't do. "I need to disguise myself." Jing Wushuang was very considerate. His fingers supported his forehead and lightly smiled. "I don't want to be surrounded by people every day, asking me to help them make armaments." The black-clothed man lowered his eyes. "Apart from the Supreme Master, those teachers of White Academy have never seen young master before. You shouldn't be recognized when you go in. There are a few students from White Academy who are participating in the armament meeting this time." Jing Wushuang coughed. His pair of extremely gentle and elegant eyes were like an ink painting. The person who won his armament was one of them. The black-clothed man's eyebrows slightly drooped. "Young master, don't worry. I'll greet the 3 students who are present today. Apart from that Hellion Vivian, whom Master is not familiar with. The other two people won't reveal young Master's identity. She also won't. Jing Wushuang's tone was indifferent as he withdrew his gaze. The black-clothed man was astonished. How did young Master know? She's not that kind of person who likes trouble. Jing Wushuang coughed twice as if he had thought of something. The rare corners of his mouth unexpectedly revealed a faint arc. It was the kind of genuine smile that was different from the one in front of people. The black-clothed man looked somewhat dumbfounded. What kind of situation was this? Shouldn't he ask Uncle Liang what had happened these 2 days when he wasn't here? Young Master actually spoke up for that famous hedonistic young lady in the capital? This was a bit too strange. Let's go. Jing Wushuang turned around. His sickly handsome appearance made him look like a gentle jade young master in an ancient painting scroll. He was neither anxious nor impatient, tidy up and prepare to enter the academy in a few days. The black-clothed man lowered his head and appeared very respectful. Yes. However, what else is there? Jing Wushuang saw that he wanted to say something but hesitated. He looked towards the black-clothed man's direction. The black-clothed man lowered his head even more. When this subordinate entered the city, I discovered quite a few experts. They all seemed to have come from the capital. They should be the 4 great clans' death warriors. Only, this subordinate doesn't understand why they came to Armament City. Jing Wushuang's fingers paused. He lifted his eyes and looked towards the bright crescent moon. This capital's sky is about to change. Some people can't hold themselves back. Young Master's meaning is that their target is the third prince. The black-clothed man was so shocked that his eyelids jumped. However, he knew that the Jing family had always stood on the neutral side and never participated in the matters between them. However, he also couldn't help but say that those old men's guts were really too big. They actually dared to come and assassinate the third prince. However, he also received news that the third prince came out by himself. He didn't bring anyone by his side. No wonder the young master said that the capital's sky was about to change. This time, the third prince was afraid that the odds were against him. Chapter 131. At night, the fire Cheline in the fantasy space suddenly opened its eyes. Its red pupils flashed with a bright light. Beligaju was lying on the carved wooden bed. Both of his hands were placed in front of his chest. His posture was as elegant as a noble sleeping in an ancient castle. However, he was not asleep. Under the silver mask, his long and narrow eyes exuded a faint chill. Swish! Countless swords fell from the top of his head. Beligaju's cold eyes narrowed. He did not move at all. All the swords seemed to be suspended in the air. Then, Beligaju's eyes twitched. As if he had a reaction, those swords broke into pieces and turned into powder. The black-robed men were shocked. They looked at each other. Their bodies turned and landed on the ground. They were just about to launch a second attack. However, they saw the man turn his hand. Those swords seemed to be controlled by someone and stabbed towards them. The black-robed men stretched out their hands to block. Their whole body took a step back. Their throat was sweet and their internal organs were in pain. This person, he actually recovered his martial chi. The black-robed men once again exchanged glances. They wanted to send this news out. Want to run? Bailey Jiaoju's extremely cold and stern voice was decisive. He pinched the neck of one of the people and slowly lifted him up. The action was full of murderous intent, but when he did it, it had a kind of indescribable beauty. Only a cracking sound was heard. Bailey Jiaoju flung the limp man in his hand away. His pair of eyes were so calm that it made everyone feel terrified. Bailey Jiaoju, you. The leader of the black-clothed men saw that Bailey Jiaoju's raised hand emitted waves of martial chi. Immediately, he was shocked and angry, but he had misgivings about Bailey Jiaoju's powerful killing power when he raised his hand, so he unconsciously stepped back. Is this lord's name something you can casually call out? Beligaju sneered. This time, he only moved his finger slightly. His indifferent look was simply unbearable. However, as soon as he finished speaking, the black-clothed man, who had retreated several meters away, shrieked and fell to the ground. Everyone's expression changed. At this moment, even though the men in black had the advantage in numbers, they didn't dare to face Bellegaju's heaven-defying attack head-on. Because no one had informed them that the third prince had recovered his martial chi. However, since they were planning to assassinate the third prince, they would not let it end so simply. It was as if there was no end to the black-robed men, as they rushed in wave after wave. The beautiful young man whose mouth was gagged narrowed his eyes as he watched the continuous slaughter. His thin lips that were originally curled up slowly stiffened. No. Something was wrong. These were not the Han family soldiers who had come to save him. At first, he thought that they were his own people, because they were wearing the special clothes of the Han family. But when the sword fell beside him, the beautiful young man cursed in his heart, "Mother." He was only informing them so that they could teach his brother a lesson. He didn't ask them to cut him down. Furthermore, if they were truly the guards of the Han family, it was impossible for them to not recognize him. Ooh! The pretty boy moved his face and spat out the smelly sock in his mouth with great difficulty. "Brother, they are not the Han family's people." Just as his voice fell, the sound of horse hooves could be heard, echoing clearly in the empty alley. Hellion Vivian, who was walking back, turned around and pressed her back against the wall, listening to the sound getting closer and closer. A woman. Yuan Ming also pricked up his ears, and his expression changed. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment, then directly jumped onto the roof. Hellion Vivian could not help but be shocked. This kind of terrifying attack power, only the third prince could do it. The legendary gold level 10 attack from the woman beside him. A man in black shouted from afar. It was clear that he was the leader of these people, and he was quite smart. However, they miscalculated one thing, and that was that the person they wanted to attack was not a weak woman. Chapter 132. The corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth curled up. She raised her hand and an umbrella appeared out of thin air. With a beautiful twist of her wrist, countless weapons fell down along with the rain. Then, she heard a few miserable screams. No one was able to touch her at all. Instead, they were beaten up by her to the point that even standing up was a problem. Bellegaju glanced in her direction and a light smile appeared in his eyes. That smile had a bit of ambiguity in it. She didn't know if it was unintentional or intentional. He reached out his hand and pulled her back. His tone was indifferent. "You stained me." Only then did Wei Wei react. His Highness was obsessed with cleanliness. She didn't understand at all. It's normal to be splashed with blood during fighting and killing. Someone like him who killed a large number of people and didn't even have the slightest bit of blood on his body was actually an anomaly. "Let's go." Bailey Jiaju narrowed his eyes and pulled Hellion Wei Wei over. He knew this group of people too well. This group of people had always been ruthless and did not leave the slightest bit of leeway. Therefore, they would definitely not let this matter go. Hellion Vivian also noticed this. Because more and more people were surrounding them. It was as if they couldn't kill them all. The other side even had rocket launchers. Even if they had 3 heads and 6 arms, it wouldn't be easy to dodge this kind of attack. Hellion Vivian looked at the slowly approaching black-clothed people. She knew that they were all specially trained experts. They came with the determination to win. Nothing good would come out of a head-on confrontation. It was better to let the third prince go. She would stay behind to deal with the aftermath and look for an opportunity to escape. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment. Then, she whispered to Bellegaju, "You go first." This Highness doesn't want to listen to your extremely stupid method." Bellegaju didn't wait for Hellion Vivian to finish speaking. He glared fiercely at Hellion Vivian. There was an undisguised coldness in his eyes. Hellion Vivian was slightly surprised. With the third prince's intelligence, he definitely understood what she meant. He was also very clear that this was indeed beneficial to everyone. But why didn't he do that? Hellion Vivian looked up and was about to say something. Then, he was picked up from behind and carried on a shoulder. A slightly indifferent voice sounded in his ear, "If you have time to be long-winded, why don't you hurry up and leave?" Thus, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Hellion Vivian was carried by His Highness with one hand as he fought with the other. No matter how many people attacked him, Belagaju did not stop. His steps were graceful, but his speed was astonishing. Hellion Vivian weakly patted the man's thin but familiar shoulder. She couldn't wait to take a bite. The assassins in black rushed forward one by one and attacked her and Belagaju mercilessly. When the first group of black-clothed men fell, another group would rush up from behind. No one knew how many people the other party had prepared. After a long battle, even if she and Belagaju were made of iron, they would not be able to hold on. In the beginning, it was Belagaju who was carrying her. Behind them, it was the two of them who were back to back. The archers started to release arrows. More and more arrows were released, densely packed. Hellion Vivian was worried that those swords would injure Belagaju. She quickly turned around and helped him block those fire arrows. The black-clothed man standing to the side seemed to have long anticipated that Hellion Vivian would make such a move. Taking advantage of the time when she was protecting Belagaju, the sword in his hand changed direction and stabbed straight at Hellion Vivian. Belagaju's gaze paused. Her whole body was like an unsheathed sword, directly piercing towards the center of the black-clothed men. Wherever she went, no one was lucky enough to escape. Those black-clothed men only saw a flash of silver light in front of their eyes. It was as if someone used a hand to choke their throat. When they reacted, they were already dead. A strong wind suddenly rose, which made the black-clothed men's commander confused. They didn't know where they were at all. In less than 10 seconds, a tornado swept past. When they opened their eyes again, the dead people in front of them were all their own people. As for the third prince, they didn't know where he went. But the only thing they were sure of was that those two people didn't run far, because the tornado disappeared around here. The black-clothed men's judgment was correct. Hellion Vivian and Belagaju didn't run too far. Hellion Vivian's body had limited physical strength. If it wasn't for today's siege, she wouldn't have used the martial and devil dual cultivation technique. Firstly, it was because it consumed too much martial chi. Secondly, it was because if a discerning person saw her technique, they would know that it was related to the devil. And in Dragon War Empire, devil cultivators were not allowed. Chapter 133. When dealing with devil cultivators, the 4 great clans would immediately exterminate them. Even the Imperial clan was against devil cultivators. Because there was such a legend in the Dragon War Empire. Legend has it that for thousands of years, the divine continent was not ruled by real humans. Instead, it was ruled by a man with devil blood flowing in his veins. But he was not interested in power. No matter how prosperous the outside world was, it had nothing to do with him. He only lived in his palace, had an appearance and eternal life that everyone envied, and sat on top of all the devils in the world. Whether it was divine beasts or humans, they all worshipped him. They wanted to get close to him, but at the same time, they revered him in their hearts. But humans could not be controlled by a devil forever. So the aristocratic family sent another girl to get close to this man. The girl did not dare to believe that in this world, there was such a noble person other than herself. He only sat on the throne and did not even look at her. Noble and indifferent, he looked at the gloomy forest outside the window. Half of his face was propped up, and with a casual smile, it made the world lose its face. The girl fell in love with this man, but in the end, in order to obtain the entire divine continent, she chose to betray him. She gathered 4 powerful monks from the Buddhist and Daoist sects, and with their blood and lives as a guide, she set up 4 demon-slaying seals along the divine continent's mountain range in the north, south, east, and west. The Daoist scriptures recorded the history like this. At that time, the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked, ghosts cried and gods howled, and blood rained down from the sky for 7 days and 7 nights. The demons fell into the yellow springs, never to see the light of day again. It was to trap the man, because the girl knew how strong the man was. As long as he was slightly weaker, she would not be able to suppress him. Not to mention, he still had the 4 great divine beasts, the fire Cheline by his side. Just like that. The man disappeared, and even the 4 great divine beasts, the fire Cheline, were seriously injured and raised in the spirit forest. People wanted to tame it countless times, and even wanted to use a divine beast contract to restrict it, but they were always bitten back. When the fire Chileen appeared again, the 4 great clans panicked, because it was said that the person chosen by the fire Chileen would very likely become a generation's king. Humans were like this: when it came to their own interests, they would always do what was most beneficial to them, and even kill them. The 3rd prince did not go to the devil cultivator, and they treated him like this. If others knew that she had the devil's emissary, she wondered what those people would do to her. That's why Wei Wei didn't order Yuan Ming around all this time in order to avoid being discovered. Now, she could only hope that the 3rd prince didn't notice anything because her actions were too fast. As Hellion Vivian thought of this, she looked in the man's direction. She saw that there was something wrong with his eyes. It was as if he couldn't see anything. How could this be? Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. The cultivation dissipation powder did not have the effect of blinding people. Beligaju said faintly, "The poison from 10 years ago has relapsed." "You're talking about the fire in the palace?" Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. These people from the 4 great clans were really vicious and merciless. "Give me your hand." Regardless of the poison in the past, she had to treat his current wounds first. Beligaju paused, then handed over his left hand. Hellion Vivian tore his sleeve into pieces. She knew that the poison was very strong, but she did not expect that it would penetrate so quickly. There was no time. The skin around the wound was slowly turning black. She must immediately think of a way. If she had the tools at hand, she could also do a small operation for him. She had too many disguised identities, so holding a scalpel was not a big deal for her. But now, not only did she not have any tools, those black-clothed people had not left, and they would find them in a short time. However, this kind of poison could not be delayed. If it was delayed, the 3rd prince may be crippled. Hellion Vivian tasted what it was like to be a waste in the Dragon War Empire. This body reminded her almost every day, because she did not know martial qi, she was humiliated. Bailey Jiaoju had already lost his martial qi once because of the fire in the past. Hellion Vivian knew that it was easy for people to go from low to high, and from high to low, no one would know the pain in her heart. Not to mention a cold perfectionist like Beligaju. In the end, if it were not for her, he would definitely be able to avoid that arrow. Hellion Vivian looked up. His pair of beautiful eyes had lost their usual indifference and coldness. There was no reflection in them. Under her hand was a man's skin that was not hot like before. Hellion Vivian was shocked by the heat coming from his body. He had a fever, and the temperature was shockingly high. "You have a fever, when did this happen?" She wanted to know if the change in his body temperature was related to the cultivation dissipation powder. Bailey Jiaoju looked deeply at her, who was almost a foot away from him. The two of them were very close to each other. Because she wanted to avoid being searched by the men in black, she simply sat in his arms and was more obedient than ever. However, fever. No matter what, Bailey Jiaoju was always cold and indifferent. "Am I having a fever?" Hellion Vivian heard this and was almost speechless. Did he not even know when he had a fever? "How about this? I'll ask in a different way. When did you feel a headache?" Hellion Vivian watched the man press his long eyebrows with his slender fingers. While rolling up his long sleeves, he sorted out his thoughts. Beligaju looked at her expressionlessly. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched twice. "Don't tell me you don't even know when you have a headache." "I know." His Highness gave her 2 words very casually. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. She could finally communicate. "When was that?" "The day you ran away." His Highness did not even change his tone of voice. His elegance had a self-proclaimed coldness. Hellion Vivian, at this time, the 3rd prince was still in the mood to choke her. Was he trying to make her feel even more guilty? No. The 3rd prince should not have that kind of character. Hellion Vivian restrained her emotions. "So, you have been burning for 3 days and 2 nights. How could there be such a person?" The world was right. The 3rd prince was not a person. He was a god. "I don't know." Beligaju turned his face to the side. His motionless expression showed indifference, letting the wound ooze blood. "That's it. It seems that the situation is not so bad, at least the cultivation dissipation powder's poison is not so deep." Helian Wei's eyes turned and her line of sight fell on Bailey Jioju's hand. She didn't think too much about it. Instead, she fiercely exhaled and then quickly bent down. Chapter 134. Belegaju's fingers paused. His cold thin lips parted as he looked at Helian Vivian, who had placed her thin lips on his arm to help him absorb the poison. Suddenly, his eyes congealed and he directly pushed the person to the side. He forcefully pressed down on her wrist, his voice indifferent. Do you know what kind of poison this is? Even if you indiscriminately suck it in. Cultivation scattering powder, bar. Helian Vivian spat out a mouthful of black blood that she had just sucked out. She carelessly met his eyes. It's only a little less martial chi. When the time comes, I'll just cultivate again. Hey, I say, Your Highness, can't you just be an obedient blind person? His eyes couldn't see, yet his strength was still so great. Sure enough, he wasn't human. Helian Vivian let out a long sigh. She was prepared to wait for an opportunity to continue sucking out the poisoned blood for him. Belegaju directly used his left hand to press against her head. This Highness sees that you don't want to live anymore. Yes, yes, yes. Wait until you have the strength to kill my 9 generations. Helian Vivian leaned over while her mouth vaguely said, it's best to kill all of those people from the Helian family. That would also save her from wasting her own strength. Belegaju's eyes seemed to slightly flash as he looked at the hairy little head in front of him. In the depths of his eyes, there seemed to be a faint trace of gentleness. Don't look at how this woman was normally vicious and merciless. When she was well behaved, she actually looked quite pleasing to the eye. All right, it's about time. Helian Vivian continuously sucked in a few mouthfuls of black blood, spitting it out on the ground. She looked at the wound. However, this is only temporary. We must find a place as soon as possible to help you clean up the remaining poison. After she finished speaking, she again continuously spat out 2 mouthfuls of black blood. Her lips were somewhat numb and she felt some martial chi drain. However, it couldn't be considered much. Just like she said, when the time came, it would be fine to cultivate again. On the contrary, Yuan Ming evilly laughed. Woman, you're really generous to this third prince. It can't be that you've fallen in love with him, right? Helian Vivian chuckled and replied silently, you always say that I have feelings for you. Until now, do I have feelings for you? Maybe it's because you feel that I don't like you that you decided to take a step back and choose the third prince. Yuan Ming's narcissism was directly proportional to his age. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. Wake up, will you? No matter how bad your eyes are, they all know that you're the second best. Even if the third prince was an Evildor, he was still a perfect Evildor. The others were indeed no match for him. Helian Vivian's gaze then fell on Belegaju's side profile. She wondered what this Evildor looked like. It was said that the fire had disfigured the third prince. That was why the third prince wore a silver mask all year round. Except for a very small number of people, no one could see his true face. In the past, Helian Vivian had believed this rumor. But now, Helian Vivian felt that with this Evildor's style, his face shouldn't have been disfigured. It was very possible that this was a smoke screen deliberately released by the man. It was said that curiosity could kill the cat. The more Helian Vivian looked at the man in front of her, the more her heart itched. Because the two of them were in an especially close position, the tip of her nose was filled with the man's pleasant smell of sandalwood. It faintly lingered in the surroundings, as if it could cover a person in a small world. No matter how chaotic the situation outside was, no matter how dangerous it wouldn't reveal the slightest trace on his body. On the contrary, it would give people a kind of indifference as if he held the world in his hands. Helian Vivian's eyes moved. Although she knew that the situation wasn't right, she wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to get close to the third prince and see what he looked like. Thinking like this, Helian Vivian cautiously raised her hand and was just about to quickly remove that silver mask. But the man's hand turned around and pressed down on her wrist. His voice was deep and heavy. Not being honest again? We're trapped here, so we have to find something to do. Helian Vivian pretended to be regretful and said, thinking about it, I'm so young, and I'm about to be surrounded and killed. Before I die, I have to know what the people around me look like. Beligaju listened to her roguish tone and his thin lips slowly curved up. She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but his breath hit her left ear little by little. He said with a deep meaning, "You definitely don't want to see this king's appearance. I'm a person who doesn't care much about beauty or ugliness." It was pure curiosity that caused trouble. Hellion Vivian shrugged her shoulders and continued to be eager to try. Beligaju laughed in a low voice. It was cold and indifferent, but it also had a playful feeling that Hellion Vivian didn't understand. Then he said, "The person who takes off this king's mask will have to accompany this king for a lifetime. Are you sure you want to take it off?" When Hellion Vivian heard this, she immediately pulled back her hand. Bailey Jiu naturally sensed her movements. His originally empty eyes suddenly sank fiercely, and the corners of his mouth were also dyed with a faint iciness. She couldn't avoid him at all costs. He had just thought that she was very obedient. It seemed like everything was just an illusion. A fox was always very cunning, so he couldn't let down his guard against her. Thinking of this, Beligaju raised his numb hand and pressed it against his forehead. When Hellion Vivian saw his movements, she retracted her hand and reached out again. But she didn't lift his silver mask and still put the back of her hand on his forehead. Her hand was very cool. When it was placed on his burning forehead, it made the slightly uncomfortable Beligaju slightly relax his long eyebrows. And Hellion Vivian was scalded by that temperature. The fever didn't reach his legs and his body temperature kept rising. Even if the third prince wasn't human, he still needed to be treated as soon as possible. Hellion Vivian had just opened her mouth when she heard the sound of footsteps from not far away. Those people were coming. Hellion Vivian's breathing became sluggish. Before the flying arrows arrived, she quickly stretched out her fingers and an umbrella appeared out of nowhere. With a sweep of her long legs, 3 or 4 black-clothed people fell to the ground together. "Let's go." Hellion Vivian wanted to pull Beligaju up. But she saw him standing there, unhurriedly using his fingers to brush off the dust that wasn't on his body. His voice was as indifferent as before, "No need." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Beligaju pulled her back with a pair of indifferent eyes. His voice carried a trace of evil that had never been there before. "We can also compete with them in terms of numbers." Just as the man's voice fell, Hellion Vivian saw that not far away, countless war horses were galloping from the distance. Those people were all wearing black riding clothes. Their faces were black, and their hands were holding swords. They were like a black wind that swept over. Everywhere they went, there was blood. However, the man just stood in this bloody scene without even blinking. He didn't even care about the slightest bit of dust. He was always so clean and cold like a high and mighty god. But Hellion Vivian knew that he was never a soft-hearted god. He was a demon. Chapter 135. It's the Shadow Guards. Why would they appear here? Didn't they say that the third prince didn't bring a single person? The men in black looked at each other in dismay. Clearly, they were caught off guard by this sudden situation. They looked at the cavalrymen who were flanking them from both sides and dropped the swords in their hands. They wanted to seize the opportunity to escape. But how could Beligaju allow this to happen? He stood at the entrance of the wind and looked down at this scene from a high vantage point. He calmly and unhurriedly took out a white handkerchief and wiped away the bloodstains on Wei Wei's fingers. His thin lips slightly curved. "Kill." It was only one word, but Hellion Vivian could feel an unprecedented sense of oppression. The black mass of cavalrymen swept past, bringing along the sound of martial chi with them. This was the legendary Ghost Palace, killing 3,000 crows, not leaving a single one alive. Hellion Vivian almost suspected that the third prince was doing this on purpose. He was deliberately waiting for the black-clothed people to come out before he mobilized the cavalry to surround and kill them. Just as she was thinking this, Hellion Vivian felt a weight on her shoulder. The man who was originally standing there suddenly leaned on her shoulder. Hellion Vivian moved her hands and propped him up. She didn't care about the shadow guards who were leading the cavalry and wanted to drag the third prince away from here first. Belagaju tried his best to hold on to his last bit of willpower. His voice was extremely cold. Tell them to leave one alive for this highness. Kill the rest without mercy. Okay. Hellion Vivian listened to the man's cold voice and raised her eyebrows. She once again sighed at the abnormal physical strength of a certain highness. At this time, the fire Chelene also came over. Because the owner's weakness would be returned to the divine beast 10 times, the fire Chelene's condition didn't look very good. But this didn't affect its ability to bite those black-clothed people who tried to get close to Hellion Vivian and the others. It basically crushed them to death with one claw. However, it didn't continue to fight. In its heart, only the safety of its master was the most important. How is master? Such a huge divine beast suddenly opened its mouth to speak. Hellion Vivian felt that the originally unstable road was trembling even more. She glanced at it and said, "Bend down." The fire Chelene had never been ordered by anyone other than its master, so it was somewhat stunned. Wei immediately pressed down on its big head. After that, she dragged Bailey Jiaoju up. After that, she nimbly flipped over, her voice neither soft nor soft. Third prince needs treatment. First, go find a quieter place. It's best if there's hot water and a bed. The fire Chelene took a deep look at Hellion Vivian. It had seen many different types of women, but it had never seen one as calm as Hellion Vivian. The fire Chelene didn't say anything else and displayed its divine beast nature. It spread out its 4 limbs, and its large wings spread out from both sides. It was tall and sturdy like the war horse of the Grim Reaper in comics. When the fire Chelene flew, there would be a strong wind. Hellion Vivian could only grab onto its red fur, but she only had one thought in her heart. If there was a chance in the future, she would definitely tell the winged beast that had once carried her, that their boss' beautiful fur wasn't soft at all. Moreover, when it flew, it was a bit too irritable. The people sitting on its back couldn't even open their eyes because of its flashing wings. It was also because of the fire Chelene that Hellion Vivian and the others quickly found a suitable place to treat their injuries. Hellion Vivian didn't forget what Belagaju had just instructed her. She turned her head towards the fire Chelene and said, "Go tell those shadows, leave one alive for investigation, kill the rest without mercy." This was the second time this woman had ordered it. The fire Chelene calmly moved its claws, its voice without the slightest ripple. "Those things, young Master Han can do them all. The most important thing now is to heal Master." "Young Master Han?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Little tyrant." She really imagined the appearance of a beautiful youth brandishing a sword and playing with a spear. However, since the fire Chelene had said so, it meant that the youth wasn't as simple as he looked on the surface. Hellion Vivian gathered her thoughts and put them on Belagaju's wound. Even the skin there had turned black, and the surrounding muscles had begun to show signs of stiffness. The poison that she had just suppressed by sucking blood had begun to spread again. The cultivation scattering powder's poison wasn't easy to detoxify, and they wouldn't be able to find the antidote in a short time. Even if the third prince had ordered to leave one alive, that person didn't seem to have the antidote on him. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment, and decided to do it herself. The third prince has been poisoned by the cultivation scattering powder. Ordinary medicine simply can't treat it. You go prepare a bucket of hot water, a jar of Enur Hong, a few pieces of white cloth, as well as a needle and thread bag. "I'll need them in a while." Hellion Vivian ordered the fire Chelene with a clear mind. She didn't forget to take out a pill from her bosom and put it into Belagaju's mouth. This time, the fire Chelene didn't care about the taste of her orders. It quickly transformed into its human form, and prepared all the things that Hellion Vivian wanted it to prepare. Hellion Vivian took the things and skillfully pulled up her long sleeves, rolling them up a few times, exposing her snow-white wrists. She reached out to tear all the clothes on Belagaju's body to shreds. She didn't expect that the royal's sense of defense was more powerful than she had imagined. Just as her fingers were about to touch his chest, he suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with an unusual light, as if he was going to tear her apart with his own hands if she were to get any closer. His eyes were filled with a thick evil aura. When he saw that the person in front of him was her, those deep eyes gradually recovered their calm. His voice was hoarse and low. "What are you doing?" "I'm giving you a small operation." Hellion Vivian didn't mind his vigilance. She was the same. She would never let anyone get close to her, especially when she was injured. She would be more aggressive than usual, because she needed to protect herself. Like the third prince, who was finally chased from time to time, and was betrayed by his personal maid, it was estimated that he would be even more like this. So Hellion Vivian raised her hands and let him see the silver knife and needle in her hands. Then she continued, "You were unconscious just now. Since you are awake now, you can take it off yourself. It will save me the trouble of doing it." The Fire Chaline's eyes turned round when he heard this. This woman ordered him, but she even dared to order his master. Was she afraid that his master would be impatient and cut off her claws? The Fire Chaline touched his chin, but he saw his master just raise his eyebrows. Then, he really slowly untied the fur robe. His chest was exposed, and his honey-colored skin was plated with a layer of silver under the moonlight. It was like flowing satin, storing an astonishing explosive power. Chapter 136. Hellion Vivian had always thought that the third prince's figure would be very good, but she didn't expect it to be so good to the point that it was pleasing to the eye. She suddenly felt that he should find a chance to go to the fragrant garden or something. He would definitely be able to sell for a good price. Saliva. The man's cold voice rang in her ears. If that kind of self-centered sitting posture were to be taken out, the group of noble ladies in the capital would definitely faint again. However, the third prince always liked to have a poisonous tongue, which was not desirable for her. Let him have his poisonous tongue. Later, she would charge him more surgery fee. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian's mouth curved into a smile. She reached out and took out the needle and thread, then smoked it under the oil lamp. Her movements were very professional, so fast that it made people dazzled. After the silver needle was done, Hellion Vivian wiped the man's body temperature. It was actually higher than before. She didn't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing that he could still stay awake with a fever like this. If the other party was unconscious, she could use the knife on his body without any scruples. But he was awake, so she had to carefully serve him. She couldn't take the opportunity to see what he looked like. Hellion Vivian felt uncomfortable and secretly decided to double the surgery fee. Drink the Enrich Hong, it can stop the pain. Hellion Vivian swept away the indifference and leisurely from before. She tied up the scattered hair again and carefully fixed the strands that were scattered around his ears. Her whole body emitted a cautious and evil aura. "Lie down. Lie down." Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows. A pair of long and narrow eyes stopped at the bayonet in Hellion Vivian's hand. Hellion Vivian met his gaze and thin lips curved. "You can also sit down, but it will hurt more when you use the knife." Beligaju faintly hummed, but didn't do anything. Hellion Vivian understood his meaning and didn't say anything more. She directly took the wine and drank a mouthful, but didn't swallow it. Instead, she sprayed it all on Beligaju's wound. Following that, she picked up the silver knife and ruthlessly cut along the lines of his muscles. Beligaju's thin lips tightened as his line of sight moved upwards. A delicate and pretty little face was reflected in his clear peach blossom eyes. Being stared at by the man like this, Hellion Vivian didn't panic at all. She dug out the arrowhead and began to clean the wound with cold wine. After cleaning it, she picked up a needle and stitched up Beligaju's wound. When Beligaju saw this, a faint light flashed in his cold eyes. He had seen countless famous doctors, but he had never seen such a treatment method. Was there such a treatment method in the Divine Land? Beligaju's eyes darkened as he asked casually, "What do you think of possession?" Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly skipped a beat, but her hands remained calm as she continued, "I haven't studied it." Could it be that this man had discovered something? Hellion Vivian's eyes tightened. In the Divine Land, the most forbidden thing was possession. The so-called possession was a change of soul from the original body. It was basically the same as her current situation. The possessor would be burned in a raging fire for 3 days and 3 nights. She didn't want to be treated as some kind of demon. That's why she hid everything and didn't even disclose her identity as the owner of Profound Heavens. Although that would bring her a lot of convenience, at the same time, there would be people watching her. Helian Guang Yarrow wasn't stupid. Even Helian Jiawa had a bit of brain. It was impossible for a person to change so much in one night. She had to take it slow and let them think that other than her change in temperament, everything else was obtained by luck. Beligaju watched this scene and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up into a faint smile. The next morning, the wind was gentle and the birds were chirping. Helian Vivian opened her eyes and saw a golden ray of sunlight shining in, causing her to slightly squint her eyes. Just as she was about to get up and move around, she found that she seemed to be pressing down on something hard. She slightly raised her eyes to look and saw that she was pressing down on the third prince. Chapter 137. Beligaju's masked face glowed with a faint silver light under the sunlight. He was so handsome that it was somewhat dazzling. Only, his temperament was too calm. He was so indifferent and cold that it made people feel like it was blasphemy to get close to him. Helian Vivian stared at the man in front of her. Because of the sudden change in scene, she was a bit confused. Her body also stiffened and she stopped moving. However, while she was lost in thought, Beligaju's cold voice suddenly sounded and instantly pulled her back to reality. If you want to look at this king, then sit properly. This king is uncomfortable with you pressing down on me like this. Every word was like a gem and there was no trace of sleepiness. Or, are you saying that you just want to throw yourself into my arms? Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. Her eyes moved down and she gave a cool smile. With your highness' current state, you don't have the qualifications to criticize me. Beligaju kept his hands behind his head. His lazy appearance made it seem like the one who had a reaction wasn't him at all. He was simply an Evildor among Evilders. Helian Vivian couldn't compare to the other's face. She pulled back her hands and planned to get up. Beligaju's eyes were half closed as he looked at the woman in front of him. His expression seemed to be quite dissatisfied with losing a pillow. This king still hasn't slept enough. Helian Vivian's mouth twitched. What did he mean this king still hasn't slept enough? What did it have to do with her whether he slept enough or not? Moreover, his posture clearly showed that he wasn't hugging a person, but a pet. How did she look like a pet? Helian Vivian was just about to use violence to subdue the third prince when she heard a slightly hoarse and deep voice with a unique coldness. In the future, don't snore when you sleep. Helian Vivian stared at him. How did she snore when she slept? Aside from personal attacks, what else could this third prince do? Isn't it tiring to live in the clouds all day long? What's the point of caring about so many details? Helian Vivian looked at the man who was close to her and secretly cursed. Even his sleeping posture was so perfect that it was abnormal. He didn't feel tired at all. She had been sleepy for a long time. Anyway, there weren't any extra beds here. After helping His Highness's fever for an entire night, her eyes were a little tired. Helian Wei adjusted her position and moved closer to the bed to take a nap. But, why were the three sovereigns lying down as well? Helian Vivian thought that a clean freak like him would get up as soon as he woke up, just like last time in Spirit Forest. Looking at the current situation, he did not intend to look for another room. There was a man lying beside her in such an unbridled manner, and the surrounding was filled with the distinct scent of Dragon Yang sandalwood, with a unique cold aura. Helian Vivian's line of sight couldn't help but stop at the side of his face with the mask on. The high bridge of his nose, the thin corners of his lips, and the cold lines always gave people the illusion that their hearts would stop beating. Thinking of this, Helian Vivian felt her eyelids become heavy. She simply yawned and went back to sleep. Beligaju still maintained his original position as he lay to the side. Looking at the sleeping Helian Vivian, his ink-black eyes gradually sank. The sleeping Helian Wei appeared to be very quiet. What didn't change was still that roguish aura. He didn't know where she learned it from. Her slender and thick eyelashes covered her eyelids, fluttering like a butterfly's wings. Her nose was small and delicate. The black ink on her face was a little smudged. She looked like a stupid fox that fell into the ink. However, Beligaju knew that this fox would only settle down when she was sleeping. Replying to His Highness, only one was left alive. The news was also released, saying that they provoked young Master Han. Shadow knelt on the ground and respectfully replied. Millimeter. The man indifferently sipped a mouthful of tea, his black eyes slightly drooping, not knowing where he was looking. He only indifferently ordered, "Continue to watch." "Yes." Shadow responded. "Then, should we tell Miss Hellion about His Highness's identity at White Academy?" Belagaju's finger that was turning the silver mask paused, his expression was indifferent. "No need, everything is as usual." "Yes." Shadow bowed his head and withdrew. Belagaju once again put the silver mask on his face and walked to the bedside in the inner room. His fingers rubbed Hellion Vivian's cheek, the corners of his mouth curved up devilishly. But looking at it now, it was really not bad. However, Hellion Vivian wasn't used to doing nothing and only taking advantage of others. She put down the abacus and smiled faintly. "Your Highness, how about giving those armaments parts in your hands to me? When the time comes to earn money, we'll split it 50-50. Belagaju finally looked at her. The corners of his mouth curved into a meaningful smile. "Okay. Then let's sign the contract as soon as possible," Hellion Vivian said as she took a brush from the desk and was about to start writing. In fact, Hellion Vivian felt that her writing was pretty good. At least for a modern Secret Service agent, being able to use a proper brush to write without spilling ink everywhere was already pretty good. But it still made the aloof third prince, who was like a male god, frown. "You use this kind of writing to enter White Academy?" When Hellion Vivian raised her head, her face was smeared with ink. "Don't you think that my writing is very artistic?" Belagaju sneered. "It's really ugly to the point that other people can't understand." Hellion Vivian. Now she finally understood why the third prince chose her. Apart from her skin being more eye-catching at that time, there was another point. It was because the third prince wanted to attack her from time to highlight his own superiority, probably because he was helpless against her. Belagaju leaned over and held the brush across the back of her hand. He lightly slid the tip of his nose down. Every word was so clear that it could directly be made into a modern copybook. Like moving clouds and flowing water, it also carried a faint, domineering aura. The way he held the brush was very bold. He was born with a kind of imposing manner that controlled the overall situation. His writing was also very strong. However, this kind of posture seemed to be hugging her from behind. Hellion Wei's long, shapely eyebrows creased, and she wanted to give up her position. "Don't move." Bailey Jiaoju's chest almost stuck to her back. His long eyebrows knitted as his slender fingertips fell. His voice was clear and cold without the slightest ripple. "Done." Then, he stood up straight and looked at her condescendingly, as if he was looking at a stranger. Sure enough, she was overthinking. Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a smile and gradually began to look at the contract. Some of them were written by her, and some were added by the third prince. The core idea was still the same, which was to be loving in front of others, and be strangers behind them. But there was one point. Wouldn't the scale of the wedding be too big? Did they have to announce it to the world? Hellion Vivian's gaze landed on the last clause. Biting the end of the pen, she raised her eyebrows. "There's no need to go through so much trouble. Just make a more ordinary wedding." The man looked up and casually glanced at her. "How can my, Belagaju's, wedding be ordinary?" Hellion Vivian. "Then let's do it like this first. When we think of something, we'll add it." Hellion Vivian deliberately looked at the clause of husband and wife's obligation. There was the word "no" written at the end. She was relieved. She took the red rouge and pressed her fingerprint. Then, with a faint smile, she pushed the paper away to Belagaju. The man half raised his eyebrows and looked at Hellion Vivian. When she lowered her head, she would always reveal a piece of skin behind her neck. It was very white, very tender, and very easy to bite. Thinking of this, Belagaju's gaze was somewhat unable to move away. This place had been repeatedly lingered on last night. Chapter 139. What's wrong? Hellion Vivian didn't understand why the third prince would suddenly look at her with such a gaze. But the sensitive her still sensed danger and subconsciously wanted to withdraw her hand. Beligaju was one step ahead of her and pressed down on the paper. His red fingertips fell on the paper and the imprint was clearly visible. Hellion Vivian saw that everything was settled and her mind relaxed. She stood up and moved her neck, saying, "I'm going to tidy up." It could be seen that Hellion Vivian was in a good mood. It was indeed like this. Basically, her biggest problem had been solved. The reason why Hellion Vivian thought of a contract marriage was because the third prince wasn't easy to deal with. If he became an ally, things would be a lot easier. The second reason was that she hadn't forgotten that this was ancient times. If the retired emperor didn't like her and casually bestowed a marriage upon her because of the third prince, even if she said no, it would be considered as defying the imperial edict. Therefore, she had to think of countermeasures in advance. Now that she had a contract, everything would be done according to the contract in the future. She and the third prince would get along very well. And with this written negotiation, no matter what happened in the future, she would be able to retreat from the imperial palace unscathed. But was it really like this? Hellion Vivian didn't know that when she went into the inner room to tidy up. The man sitting on the wooden chair reached out and took the paper. His deep eyes were cold and sharp like ice, as if it could pierce through a person's chest. Every word on this paper indicated that the other party wanted to keep a distance from him. Ah! Beligaju curved his cold, thin lips. His slender fingers picked up the ink brush and heavily added a word stop under the couple's obligation. Nothing and stop. That meant that the relationship between husband and wife would never stop. Bailey Jiaoju put down the ink brush and slowly folded that piece of paper. His posture was so perfect that it seemed as if all this had never happened before. The thin fog outside the window had already faded, leaving behind only a dim yellow. That was the sign of sunset. Imperial Palace, Main Hall. Emperor Murong stood by the window and pulled the black cloth off his face. He threw it aside with a gloomy expression. We failed. He didn't die. Instead, none of the secret guards we sent out returned. Then what should we do? The woman who was standing at the other end of the hall suddenly raised her head, the hair clip on her head trembling. Father, we don't have much time. The emperor's health is getting worse and worse. He has played too much. Sooner or later, he will die in the hands of a woman. Yang is too young, she doesn't understand anything. If the emperor left, based on how much the retired emperor doted on that vile spawn, the throne would definitely be given to Beligaju. This consort can't wait any longer, so this woman was none other than the master of the imperial harem, Empress Murong. She tightly gripped the handkerchief in her hand. Her fingers were dyed red and emitted an unprecedented poison. He must die. Rest assured, Your Highness. Emperor Murong lowered his voice and revealed an ominous glint in his eyes. We couldn't kill him in Armament City, but that doesn't mean we can't kill him when we return to the capital. Empress Murong pinched the handkerchief and frowned. Didn't you say that vile spawn didn't bring anyone? How come none of the secret guards came back? Our people encountered young Master Han. Emperor Murong clenched his left hand. He won't be so lucky next time. Empress Murong's eyes darkened. Father, do you have a good idea? Do you still remember the maid who poisoned him that year? Emperor Murong slowly curved his thin lips. The third prince treated her differently from the others. Empress Murong's eyebrows jumped. Didn't the retired emperor dispose of her on the spot? How come she's still alive? Of course it was me who saved her. Emperor Murong's mouth slowly curved up, carrying a sinister smile. Such a useful chess piece, of course I have to make the best use of it. Empress Murong also smiled. Since it's like this, I can rest assured. I heard that the maid was a beauty since she was young. Beauty is like poison, these words aren't wrong at all. That vile spawn hasn't chosen a consort for so many years because of her. He's such a love-struck person, heh. I don't know what they'll be like when they meet. Emperor Murong's fingers slowly rubbed the wooden table. It's impossible for her to kill him again. After all, even if the third prince is dazed for a moment after seeing her, he's not stupid to that extent. Empress Murong's eyes were filled with poison. Then let him fight with the retired emperor for this lovely person. Fight until there's no end to it, just like what the emperor did for me that year. Although it's a bit difficult, with her understanding of the third prince, it shouldn't be difficult. Emperor Murong put down the porcelain cup in his hand. He believed that everyone had a cinnabar mole in their heart. Obviously, the third prince's cinnabar mole was this maid who had accompanied him for countless years in the ice-cold palace. He didn't forget that no matter who it was, they couldn't get close to the third prince. However, this maid would always be treated specially. Emperor Murong curved his thin lips. Moreover, this special treatment would be even more lethal when he grew up. Anyway, Beligaju didn't have martial chi anymore. No matter how smart he was just a teenager. It was just that the retired emperor wasn't very fond of fighting. Far away, on the west side, in the Taixing Palace. How is it? The retired emperor couldn't help but stand up and ask the secret guard who hurried in from outside, "Is Jua all right?" The shadow respectfully kneeled on the ground and reported word for word, "Don't worry, retired emperor. His Highness has already set off for the capital. There are people following him along the way. Such a thing won't happen again." That's good, that's good. The retired emperor seemed to have aged more than 10 years. He sat back in his seat and reached out to touch his forehead. "Did you find out who saved Jua?" The shadow looked up. "Retired emperor, it's said that young Master Han was also there at that time." "Is it really young Master Han?" The retired emperor narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Such a fierce style didn't seem like that child's style. Rather, it seemed like, the retired emperor raised his eyebrows. "Go to White Academy and investigate everything that Jua has participated in recently. Then tell me the results." "Yes." The shadow lowered his eyes. "Wait a minute." The retired emperor's eyes deepened. "That Hellion girl, what's going on?" The shadow stared blankly. The retired emperor asked him like this, but he also didn't know. He didn't serve the royal family. Even if he served the royal family, he was afraid that he also couldn't guess the royal family's thoughts. The retired emperor also seemed to realize that he asked the wrong person. He waved his long sleeve. "All right, you can leave." Maybe he was thinking too much. Jua was probably just too bored recently and wanted to find a toy for himself. Chapter 140. Early in the morning, in a comfortable carriage. The burning tea wood seemed to have burned out, making a muffled sound. A light, elegant, and mellow fragrance slowly wafted out from the carved red gold incense burner, lingering for a long time. This was Longyang incense, nourishing the 5 viscera, spleen, and stomach. It was best for the body to smoke in the inner room. If Hellion Vivian's memory wasn't wrong, this Longyang incense was her mother's favorite incense in the past. However, after Madame Su married in, she took away her incense, saying that she couldn't smell it, and that it would make her sick. As a result, the entire defense division banned this incense. The servants all knew that this was the newly married second madam giving the first madam a show of strength. However, what did that good father of hers do? He protected Madame Su in all aspects, saying that her body was weak, and couldn't compare to her mother. Madame Su's body was weak, but her mother's body wasn't weak. At that time, her mother was already at the end of her life, and her chest was puffing out air. A female general of a generation galloping on the battlefield, the true head of the Hellion family, had fallen to the point where she didn't even have the qualifications to light a stick of incense. No one knew what kind of heart-wrenching situation that was. The little Hellion Vivian pinched the corner of her skirt, helplessly watching her own mother live such a pitiful life, but she couldn't do anything. The memories in the depths of her heart made Hellion Vivian tightly shut her eyes. When she opened them again, her pupils had already become clear. No matter what happened in the past, the reborn her will definitely take back all the things that originally belonged to her. Just as she was thinking, she suddenly felt that someone was looking at her. Hellion Vivian immediately restrained her baleful aura and raised her eyes towards the opposite side. Beligaju, wearing a white mink fur robe, had a languid expression as he sat on the armchair. The ancient long robe's sleeves were like blooming flowers, contrasting with his jade-like wrists. He flipped through the ancient scroll in his hand. His whole body was cold and aloof like jade. The more Hellion Vivian thought about it, the more she felt that the third prince's casual movements could be photographed in a magazine. It was a pity that such a person didn't become a star. Probably sensing Hellion Vivian's gaze, Beligaju glanced in her direction before opening a small wooden box in the carriage. His slender fingers rummaged through the contents before casually tossing a few pieces of tungsten armament to Hellion Vivian, indicating for her to play with. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows as she fiddled with the tungsten iron in her hand. The rumors were indeed true. Every single thing of the third prince's couldn't be measured by money alone. Even the things he used and ate were the best in the War Dragon Empire. Just by looking at this carriage, one could see a few things. A jade table, candied fruits, tea, snacks, a chessboard, a scroll, everything was prepared. Every single item was of the highest quality and was not cheap at all. It was luxurious and not just a little bit. Hellion Vivian also didn't hold back. She gracefully pinched a piece of Osmanthus cake and put it into her mouth. The cake melted in her mouth, and a rich flavor of mung beans accompanied by a lot of dried pears. The unique taste melted in her mouth, making her squint her eyes in enjoyment. Because she was in the carriage, in addition to the previous night's business, Hellion Vivian didn't paint her face with the black juice that would easily cause others to misunderstand her. This made her look extremely beautiful, especially when she smiled. It was dyed with the color of autumn light, lasting for a long time. Ordinary women relied on their gentle beauty to win, but she was different. She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but his finger actually slightly rubbed against her most sensitive place. Hellion Vivian felt her entire body tremble, as a numb feeling spread from her tailbone to her four limbs. Bailey Jiaoju was naturally aware of her reaction. His eyes flickered and suddenly revealed a shallow, arrogant, and evil smile. His deep and magnetic voice carried a metallic texture, just like the sound of a good cello, so sensitive. UN. Hellion Vivian looked up and saw the sun faintly shining on that person's body. The light outlined his perfect figure, both good and evil, like a knife or an axe. When he whispered into her ear, the faint sandalwood scent brought along a kind of electric cold. This fellow, he was born to challenge a woman's self-control. Hellion Vivian had already heard that the one who lived in Ghost Palace, as long as he wanted to, he could make any girl melt into him. Unfortunately, she was not in the any girl category. Hellion Vivian turned around and beautifully sat up straight. She said in a light voice, "Your Highness is thinking too much. It's just that my waist is a bit itchy, but this road is too unstable. It's better for your Highness to stay away from me. Who knows what will happen in a while." Chapter 141. You're quite thoughtful. Bailey Jiaoju did not stop Hellion Wei from leaving, as if whatever happened to her had nothing to do with him. He merely crossed his legs elegantly, one of his fingers slowly, as if rhythmically, tapped on his knee. There was a unique temperament that was a mixture of elegance and indifference between his eyebrows. He looked at Hellion Wei lazily, an indescribable feeling in his eyes. There was elegance in his arrogance, seemingly amiable, but not easy to get close to. It made people involuntarily think of a graceful Persian cat, noble, indifferent, and astonishingly bewitching. Hellion Vivian saw his expression and her thin lips raised. She really thought too much just now. The third prince was still that unapproachable man. It was just that the two of them were more familiar with each other compared to the beginning, so he would occasionally speak venomously to her for fun. Who told her to be the only one in the carriage? But don't expect him to be gentle. The third prince was like this, treating her as a business partner. When he should be aloof, he would still be aloof. Your Highness. Shadow's voice came from outside again, mixed with the sound of the wind. We're about to enter the city. Do you want to return directly to the palace or go to White Academy? Bailey Jiaoju raised his hand and unhurriedly tidied up his messy sleeves. His silver mask was as noble as the moonlight, contrasting with his perfect ice-cold side profile. His imposing manner was luxurious and graceful. Go to White Academy. I won't go back with your Highness. Hellion Vivian looked back with delicate features. In a while, Your Highness can just put me down at the foot of the mountain. Before winning the martial chi competition and determining the princess consort, it was better for them to keep a distance. Although she and the third prince had signed a contract, but under the circumstances of not carrying it out, if the people in the academy saw her and the third prince go back together, who knows what kind of trouble it would cause. It was really troublesome. Hearing this, Bellegaju's deep eyes deepened. He still had an indifferent appearance, but his thin lips were slightly pursed, adding a touch of coldness. Are you keeping a distance from me? Hellion Vivian paused, but didn't hide it from him. Your Highness is too popular. I'm afraid that those who admire Your Highness in the academy will see me as a thorn in their side. It's not as exaggerated as you say. Bellegaju glanced at her, and the coldness in his eyes faded a lot. Hellion Vivian packed up her things and didn't forget to reply with a light smile. That's because Your Highness doesn't understand the jealousy of women. Like the last time, she had only met the third prince by chance in the spirit forest. After returning, rumors had spread everywhere, and every new student in the academy wished they could strangle her to death. The Hellion Jiao's methods were endless. She just wanted to make her completely disappear from the White Academy. However, sometimes, Hellion Vivian really wanted to know who was behind Hellion Jiao and why she could be so unscrupulous. If it was just to protect the Su family, it shouldn't be to this extent. Su family. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, bringing out a surly feeling. Sooner or later, there would be a day when she would get rid of it. However, the problem that needed to be solved now was to properly go to the principal to cancel her leave. At that time, her master had asked for 3 days of leave for her. At that time, she had spent more than half the time fighting with the third prince. Right now, it was already the 5th day, and her master wasn't in the academy. She didn't know how the principal would punish her. Therefore, after separating from the third prince, Hellion Vivian didn't immediately return to the inferior compound. Instead, she went to Tu Su Feng's study. What she didn't expect was that when she went in, her deskmate was also there. He quietly stood in the deepest part of the study. He wore a pure white long robe with a slim green robe. His posture was as straight as a knife, and his face couldn't be seen clearly from afar. This made Hellion Vivian feel that his appearance was very familiar. He seemed to be saying something to the principal. Hellion Vivian didn't hear very clearly, but when she looked in this direction, that pair of long and narrow eyes were incomparably dark and silent, appearing particularly unfathomable. Since when did her deskmate become like this? Hellion Vivian wanted to look more carefully, but she saw him turn around. With one hand in his windbreaker, he looked like an aristocrat who had walked out of a manga. That pair of eyes were as elegant and bewitching as usual. The corner of his mouth hung an arc of a smile that wasn't a smile. He looked down at her in a lonely and bewitching manner. He demonically smiled at her. My great patron has finally returned. Hellion Vivian silently rubbed her aching temples. This man's words still made people think of elegant things. Why are you also here? Something came up at home, so I went back for a few days. Bellegaju's voice was natural, as if this topic wasn't something important. On the contrary, little Baldy, who was eating a meat bun at the side, after hearing his words, his movements paused. His small face that was like a steamed bun stiffly wrinkled up. Although he was already used to third brother's pretentiousness, seeing it still affected his appetite. The little 7th prince began to consider whether or not he should go into seclusion and wait until third brother recovered his identity before coming out. Otherwise, it would be very tiring. He had to pay attention to what he said and couldn't get too close to third brother. It was all because those people from the superior compound were always thinking of making trouble for third brother. They even set their sights on this time's academy entrance examination, wanting to take advantage of the opportunity to bully third brother. When little Baldy thought of this, he slightly raised his head, held a meat bun, and began to observe a moment of silence for those people. Tu Su Feng didn't stop his previous questioning because of Hellion Vivian's entrance. He warmly curved his thin lips, and his finger pushed up the frame of his glasses that had slid down. He said, "The inferior compound wants 3 people to participate in the academy entrance examination. You 2 recommend 1 more person to the superior compound." Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. If she didn't remember incorrectly, she only came to cancel her leave. What was this academy entrance examination thing? This is White Academy's rule. There will be an academy entrance examination every year. Yuan Ming's rather ruminating voice came from the fantasy space. Every compound will send 3 people as representatives to participate in the academy entrance examination. However, you inferior compound students have never won. Every time, you've all lost miserably. Who told you to be from the inferior compound? If the student with the worst aptitude didn't lose, then there would be no justice. Hellion Vivian raised her thin lips and lazily made an O sound. She clearly wasn't too interested. Tusu Feng naturally also saw her expression. His eyes swept over the handwriting on the fine writing paper. It was all related to the Hellion family's most famous good-for-nothing introduction. He put both hands on the table and unhurriedly said, "The academy that wins the academy entrance examination will get 100,000 taels of gold and 10 days of vacation. How about it? Do you two still feel that it's not interesting?" Chapter 142. Beligaju looked at him, his thin lips overflowing with evil. "I won't. Who told me to not pay my tuition fees yet? Of course I have to think of a way to earn more money." Cough. Little bald head immediately choked. Holding the meat bun, he stared with round eyes. Even someone as gentle as Tusu Feng couldn't help but twitch his mouth when he heard this answer. Wasn't this stinking brat too much of a pretense? Hellion Vivian didn't care what was going on with the strange atmosphere in the study. She could find someone to practice with, and she could also earn some vacation time. There simply wasn't a better deal than this. I agree. Hellion Vivian had always been efficient in doing things. However, I don't have anyone to recommend here. Apart from sleeping in class, she was usually only close to her deskmate. She didn't even recognize the rest of the people. I do. Beligaju's eyes were bewitching, his voice indifferent. Just play casually. Just bring our lie along. Little bald head played with all his might, his mouth stuffed with meat bun. He didn't say anything. According to his understanding of his third brother. Just play casually. He was referring to crushing one side to death. What's more, he was bringing along Nangong Lai, that great demon king. These 2 people together. In any case, this time he absolutely did not want to represent the superior compound in the competition. Reality proved that little 7th prince was thinking too much. Although the newly appointed elder of the superior compound wasn't as obvious as Jingwu Wang, in his heart, he still firmly believed that to deal with those trash from the inferior compound, they simply didn't need an elite like the 7th prince. Even Murong Chang Feng and Hellion Jiawa were used as backup support. As long as there was one expert in the starting lineup, it was enough. There was no need to waste too much time on the people from the inferior compound. On the contrary, he had always wanted to poach the He family's young master from the fine compound, so he had no choice but to pay more attention. As for the rest, he and the other students could casually eliminate them all. Hellion Jiawa's thoughts were the same as the superior compound's. For a martial artist like her to fight with those trash from the inferior compound was simply lowering her own standards. However, what she didn't expect was that Hellion Vivian was actually on the list. Shouldn't that bitch be expelled as soon as she returned to the academy? Could it be that Hellion Mai didn't do a good job? Hellion Jiawa's eyes darkened. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that other than being arrogant in front of others, her younger sister had no brains at all. She couldn't even do such a simple thing. Hellion Mai didn't know how she had offended the Hellion Jiawa. Whenever she saw her, the other party had a cold attitude towards her. Hellion Mai was not a good-tempered person. She clenched the handkerchief in her hand and said in an irritable tone, "Second sister, what's wrong with you? Why are you throwing a tantrum as soon as you come back?" "Throw a tantrum?" Hellion Jiawa laughed coldly. "Third sister, if father hears what you just said, you won't be able to study anymore. Why don't you take a look at where you are and speak so unruly?" Although Hellion Mai was angry in her heart, she couldn't help but admit that her father had already warned her countless times. If she made another mistake, She might really be expelled from White Academy. When that time came, she could only marry an average-looking master, or even worse. She didn't want to taste that kind of feeling. Second sister, I'm just anxious. Helion-mai muttered and softened her tone. I'm afraid I've offended second sister. Helion Jiawa knew her younger sister's weakness better than anyone else. She held the teacup and drank a mouthful of tea before slowly saying, "We're all sisters, what's there to offend? I'm saying this for your own good. Right now, your martial chi is average and you haven't had any big breakthroughs in a few years. That's pretty much it. If you don't pass the etiquette, how would your future husband be willing to marry you in the future? What second sister says is right." Helion-mai agreed with her mouth, but she wasn't happy in her heart. She wasn't a child anymore and had her own concept of honor and disgrace. Every word that Helion Jiawa said about her was practically poking at her heart. If Helion Jiawa's attitude was a little better, then it would have been fine. That kind of mocking tone made Helion-mai unable to feel happy when she heard it, but she also knew that she couldn't afford to offend her biological sister. It's good that you understand. Helion Jiawa saw that she had tamed her and began to talk about proper business. The rumors that I asked you to spread, did you spread them? Helion-mai nodded her head. I did everything according to what second sister said. It's also that little slut's luck is good. Grandmaster Zizun personally helped her apply for leave. He said that she didn't elope with some man, but rather went to Armament City. It seems that she's planning to take the Armament Master exam. Speaking to this point, Helion-mai coldly humphed in disdain. Someone like her wants to take the Armament Master exam? She's simply looking for humiliation. It would have been fine if Helion-mai didn't mention the matter of Armament City. Once she did, the poisonous intent in Helion Jiawa's eyes became even stronger. The handkerchief that she was clenching was also tightly clenched into a ball. Helion-mai observed Helion Jiawa's expression. Not knowing what had happened, she was somewhat at a loss. What was going on now? Relying on good luck alone, she won't be able to go far. Helion Jiawa took a deep breath and put down the handkerchief in her hand. Does she think that she can rely on those methods of currying favor with others to play some fancy tricks? Ridiculous. Helion-mai actually agreed with this point. Second sister, you're right. I heard that the soldiers dispatched by the third prince have already withdrawn. It's clear that he's lost interest in that slut. The third prince has never been interested in her. Helion Jiawa's voice was cold. It's just that he couldn't get used to her way of doing things and wanted to teach her a lesson. Now that he thinks it's troublesome, he withdrew the soldiers. However, this was also good. She didn't have to worry all day long that His Highness would really see that slut in a different light. Helion-mai didn't expose Helion Jiawa's thoughts and only echoed, it's still second sister who understands the third prince. However, 2 days ago, there was a rumor in the academy that a fairy had appeared in the capital. In the capital, we've all seen those big families' young ladies. How could there be such a person? We also don't know who's playing tricks. She's just an unknown village girl. Helion Jiawa leaned back and blew on her red fingertips. She's covered in poverty and pettiness. She's still a fairy, heh. Helion-mai was stunned. Sister, you've seen her? We met face to face. Helion Jiawa recalled that silhouette and felt that it was familiar, yet she couldn't remember who that person looked like. She only disdainfully said, it's just that his skin is a bit whiter, that's all. When Helion-mai heard that it was a village girl, she didn't continue to ask and change the topic. I heard that second sister got a good martial arts. Let me see it. It's not in my hands right now. Wait until before the martial chi competition. Father will negotiate with the people over there. As Helion Jiawa spoke, she again thought of that boss who didn't know how to appreciate favors. When the time comes to meet her, she must properly give her a show of strength. Chapter 143. There's one thing you still don't know. Helion Jiawa didn't beat around the bush on the topic of armaments. She was afraid that if she said too much, her envious little sister would feel uncomfortable in her heart. She simply divulged Helion Vivian's information. Helion Vivian obtained the qualifications to enter the inferior compounds competition. As expected, Helian Mai's face stiffened. How is that possible? According to the Academy's regulations, each compound could only send 3 people to enter the competition. Even she, because of her poor performance last time, was eliminated by the Fine Compound's headmaster. How could that slut be so lucky? Helian Jiawa drank a mouthful of tea. This isn't anything strange. The students of the inferior compound are all at the Earth stage. Whether or not they pass the 3rd stage is another matter. She's also in the inferior compound. If it was another compound, she might even be at the end of the line. Helian Mai thought about it and also thought so. She turned her eyes and said, I heard that these 3 people each represent different subjects. I don't know which subject that slut will choose. No matter which subject she chooses, she won't pass. I reckon that she won't even have to fight with your fine compound before the inferior compound is eliminated. Helian Jiawa wasn't worried at all. She put down the teacup in her hand and laughed disdainfully. What's more, even if that slut wins, the other 2 people in her group won't necessarily pass. The competition rules are 3 rounds, 2 wins out of 3. Helian Mai also laughed. Second sister is right. The trash in the inferior compound won't be able to make any waves. It's actually a pity for that young master. Speaking to this point, a devilish smile appeared in front of Helian Mai's eyes. Her eyes drooped and her face heated up, dyed with a crimson red. Helian Jiawa wrinkled her eyebrows. That young master? He majored in divination from the inferior compound. The more Helian Mai spoke, the more bashful her expression became. He's different from those trash. Aside from being born in poverty, he's not inferior to anyone else. During the test, he even got 1st place. Helian Jiawa didn't believe it. How could such a person be in the inferior compound? Moreover, divination was not a subject that anyone could learn. Unless one was extremely talented, no one would choose to learn divination. It's probably because his family doesn't have any power. Helian Mai sighed. Speaking of this, she felt vexed. Young Master Lai was good at everything except for this. She had ordered people to inquire about him, but they could not find anything. It could be seen that this place was too remote, and he did not have any reputation here at all. Perhaps he was the son of a concubine of some county magistrate. He wanted to be successful, so he put in a lot of effort to enter the White Academy. He was just like that young master who often stayed together with that slut, Helian Vivian. It really made her feel like she had no appetite for food, but it was a pity to throw him away. In the end, Helian Jiawa understood this younger sister of hers. She fretfully reminded her, forget about those who don't have power. Father won't let you marry over there. I know. Helian Mai clenched her hands. Suddenly, she raised an eyebrow, as if she thought of something. Second sister, if you want me to say, that slut likes to make mischief so much. It would be better to let father directly let her marry someone who can let her live in peace. Wouldn't that be better? Helian Jiawa coldly snorted. Do you think father doesn't want to? But don't forget, the blood flowing in her body is the true Helian blood. If she marries poorly, there will definitely be people who make irresponsible remarks. Second sister, what are you afraid of? How is the current her like the true Helian blood? Helian Mai's pair of eyes shone. Even the elders don't recognize her. Who would still treat her as a descendant? She's just a good-for-nothing. Father giving her a marriage is thinking highly of her. Hearing this, the Helian Jiawa's mouth followed with a smile. Why didn't I think of this? You're right. The current her simply doesn't have the qualifications to be a descendant. In a moment, I'll write a letter to father and let him quickly get rid of this slut so we don't have to worry about her. Second sister still has a way. Helian Mai bore a grudge against Helian Vivian in her heart. If it weren't for that slut, she wouldn't have fallen to this state. No matter what she did, she had to look at other people's faces. It was completely different from when she was in the Defense Division's residence. Even when she married, it wasn't her who chose others, it was others who chose her. She must let that slut have a taste of what it was like to not have a choice. It would be best if father arranged for her to marry an old man and let her marry him as a concubine. After Helian Mai and Helian Jiawa finished chatting, Her entire body felt much more comfortable. Even those students from the inferior compound who were usually unpleasant to the eye didn't seem so shabby today. When they met at the commerce courtyard, she even chatted with those people for a while. Those who came from the border cities were petty. Their intentions to curry favor with her were very obvious, and they didn't even know how to conceal it. At the same time that Helian Mai disdained them, she also enjoyed this kind of feeling. As she walked, she waved the fan in her hand. I heard that the contestants from your courtyard have come out. Who are they? The young girls who were chatting and laughing in front immediately quieted down. Following that, they curled their thin lips. There's only one girl, Helian Vivian. I don't know why the principal chose that trash. In terms of martial ability, she's not even as strong as little sister Hongye. Little sister Hongye, why don't you say something? The one who was called little sister Hongye lazily raised her head. Her sleepy eyes were blurry, but compared to the other young girls, she had a bit more heroism. What's there to say? Since the principal chose her, then it proves that she's better than me. But with your ability, you obviously can enter the fine compound. If it wasn't for young Master He not wanting to be in the same courtyard as you would also. The young girl spoke until here and suddenly realized that she said something wrong. She quickly covered her mouth and laughed awkwardly. Little sister Hongye, I didn't mean it that way. Nalan Hongye glanced at her and stretched her waist. It doesn't matter. In any case, what you said is the truth. I'll leave first. In a while, there'll be self-study for martial arts. You guys can continue chatting. Why is she so unsociable? Helian Mai looked at the young girl's departing figure and shook her head. She didn't say anything else. After all, Nalan Hongye's identity was there. Not only was she from a prestigious family, she was also friends with the He family since childhood. However, what did you guys just say? That bitch, no, I mean, my big sister, she chose martial arts. The young girls grunted in agreement. Today, during the armaments class, she was still asleep. The teacher woke her up, but she said she didn't know anything and made her stand outside for the entire class. This kind of person actually chose armaments. Do you think that our inferior compound hasn't lost enough face? After hearing what was said, Helian Mai wrinkled her eyebrows. After the last time when she and Helian Vivian had a duel, she thought that bitch would choose martial chi. She didn't expect that she would actually choose martial arts. Did she know how to assemble and disassemble martial arts? I heard that after those two young masters finished choosing, there was only martial arts left. That's why the principal arranged for that trash to choose martial arts. In any case, she'll lose no matter what she competes in. Chapter 144. The other contestants are those two young masters? Helian Mai's finger that was fanning the fan paused. Didn't they say that they don't know anything? The girls looked at each other and were somewhat embarrassed. Even if they don't know anything, they are still better than the other people in our courtyard. Helian Mai just said oh and didn't continue to ask this question. It seems that what her second sister said was right. The reason why Helian Vivian, that bitch, was chosen was entirely because the students in the inferior compound were simply not presentable. However, she had long heard of one thing. When they first entered the courtyard, those young masters from the superior compound couldn't stand those two people from the inferior compound. She didn't know how they would deal with them during the competition. In the sacrificial temple, the elders were arguing one after another because of a prophecy. Nangong Lai, who was sitting in the middle, lazily propped up his chin. He was as sloppy as he could be. Young Master Lai. The page boy walked to his side, bent down and whispered in his ear. There is news from His Highness. He wants you to stay in the academy for the next few days to participate in the academy's test. Nangong Lai's eyes lit up. Test? His Highness said that you haven't earned enough tuition fees. After the page boy conveyed this sentence, a few black lines appeared on his forehead. He really didn't know what these two masters were playing at. Nangong Lai laughed evilly. Our Jew is addicted to pretending. His Highness also said that someone from the superior compound recently wants to talk to you alone. When the page boy said the last sentence, Nangong Lai couldn't wait to stand up, his thin lips raised into a charming arc. Go get ready, we will go up the mountain immediately. He wanted to see which reckless people would bump into the muzzle of the gun. It's been a long time since he saw our Jew unilaterally beat up others. Speaking of which, since that fire, he really did behave a lot. It made people forget that once His Highness made a move, he would directly dismember people's bones. In the evening, in a corner of the commerce courtyard, the little one looked at the shadow in front of him taking a step, and he himself took a step forward shakily. Belagaju stopped and turned to look at him. His voice was neither cold nor light, without the slightest fluctuation. Go back. Third brother, when will you regain your identity? The little one's fierce little face was rounder than usual. He looked at Belagaju full of expectation. It's so boring to be alone at the superior compound. Bailey Jiu twirled his sleeves. His handsome side profile seemed to be plated with a layer of light under the illumination of the sun. He was so indifferent that it made it difficult for people to approach him. We have already discussed this issue. I will not go there for the time being. Then how about I transfer to your inferior compound? If he wasn't worried about being seen by others, he would have hugged third brother's thigh and rolled around on the ground. Third brother, who was afraid of getting dirty, was most susceptible to this move of his. Belagaju glanced at him and reached out to rub his brother's head. He still said coldly, no. The seventh prince's mouth twitched, and his small hands dropped down. No one could tell that this was the little baldy who dominated the academy when he was holding a stick. Don't look at his young age. He entered White Academy earlier than anyone else. Basically, no one dared to provoke this little king of hell. Everyone felt that this was not a child at all. Putting aside his identity, he was simply a brave and resourceful little tiger. If anyone treated him as a child, they would definitely be bitten into pieces by him in the end. Some people were puzzled. When the seventh prince was young, how did the retired emperor teach him? How did he teach him to be like this? Looking at the third prince, although it made people feel cold from the bottom of their hearts, at least he wasn't that bloodthirsty. But they were all wrong. No one knew that the person who took care of the little baldy when he was young was not the retired emperor, but Belagaju. It could be said that the seventh prince became like this because his brother told him one sentence when he was young: go fight. If you can't handle it, I'll help you fight. Apart from eating, the little baldy only remembered one thing. He had his brother behind him to support him. Therefore, it was understandable that the seventh prince was raised to be a little tiger. Okay then. The little baldy was injured. He took out a meat bun and comforted himself. I'll wait for third brother at the superior compound. Bailey Jiu caressed the little one's head again and instructed in a low voice, Shadow. Your subordinate is here. Shadow knelt on the ground with one knee. When he appeared, there was no sound. Belagaju's eyes were indifferent. In the future, follow the seventh prince. Whatever he wants to eat, go get it for him. The seventh prince seems to be banned from eating meat. Shadow changed his words to remind his master about White Academy's rules. Belagaju raised his eyebrows. And then? Shadow thought. And then, master, shouldn't you be more or less apprehensive? Belagaju continued speaking, his voice without any ripples. He's not here to be a monk. Let him eat. Shadow lowered his eyes. Yes. Sigh, rules, and whatnot in His Highness' eyes were nothing. Little seventh prince was actually very happy. Pulling Shadow, he rushed towards the commerce courtyard store. Bailey Jiu was the only one left under the shadow of the huge tree. He casually walked forward, his ink-like black hair fluttering in the wind. His outer robe was not tied with a belt, so it was draped loosely on his body. His eyelids were half closed, showing countless flirtatious thoughts. However, his facial features were indeed aesthetically pure and noble. Two kinds of extreme beauty were vividly expressed on his body. When he passed through the commerce courtyard streets, there would always be girls who couldn't help but look in his direction. Using Hellion Vivian's words, if White Academy had a ranking of handsome men, this deskmate of hers would absolutely be the number one of the number one, steadily becoming the Academy's most handsome man. Young master, look. The servant standing next to Yuan Ling Xian stepped aside in Belaguju's direction. Yuan Ling Xian didn't care at all as he coldly humphed. The other aristocratic young masters actually curved their lips into a smile. I heard that he's in the inferior compound's list of competitors this time. He's only a clown from the inferior compound. No matter how decent he looks, he still can't compare to Yuan Ge. That's right, how can he compare to Yuan Ge? But this brat is too arrogant. Don't tell me he doesn't know this is our territory. Yuan Ge, should we go teach that brat a lesson? Someone looked towards Yuan Ling Xian's direction. Yuan Ling Xian raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything. However, one could see that his expression was somewhat displeased. Another person pulled the person who spoke back. Your brain is muddled. Do we need Yuan Ge to personally deal with that kind of person? In a moment, we'll find a place where there's no one and tidy up that brat. Right. Look at me, I'm really muddled. That person slapped his forehead, his eyes shining. We're going now? What kind of situation was this? However, his confusion only lasted for a second because in the next second, a figure swept over and kicked him in the face. Without giving him the slightest chance to speak, that woman grabbed his collar and gave him 2 punches in a row. She even twisted his wrist and sneered. Is his face something you can hit as you please? Woo. How could he dare to hit his own face? That was clearly the man who had grabbed his hand and swung it at himself. He was also very astonished. What kind of person would hit themselves, bastard? Hellion Vivian frowned. What are you talking about? He probably feels wronged. Belagaju stretched out his hand and rubbed the side of his face that was beaten. His long eyebrows seemed to be furrowed because of the pain. Coupled with his long and thick eyelashes, it was easy to feel sorry for him. When Hellion Vivian saw this, she gave that man 2 more punches. You still dare to say that you are wronged? How could you do that to such a beautiful face? Woo. He was really wronged. How could he know that there was such a good actor in this world? This was the first time he beat someone up and beat himself up. What was going on? Hellion Vivian raised the corner of her mouth. What? You still don't accept it? The 4 of you beat up one person, what's there to cry about? That man shouted himself hoarse. You don't understand at all. No one can understand the pain in my heart. Let him go. Belagaju's cold voice sounded from behind. It's not good to make a scene in the academy. The other 4 young masters. You're still afraid of making a scene. If you were fucking afraid of making a scene, you wouldn't have dislocated our arms. You're letting them go so easily. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Aren't you too kind when you do things? Woo. The man in Hellion Vivian's hand was irritated again. Please, miss, take a good look. How is this man kind? Although he didn't make us bleed, it doesn't mean that he didn't want to kill us. He said it himself when he was beating us up because he didn't like how dirty the blood was. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. You seem to have something to tell me. That man was about to nod when he saw the man's gaze land on him. It was as deep as the night and as cold as ice. Gulp. He swallowed hard and shook his head. No, I don't want to say anything. Belagaju retracted his gaze and said indifferently, since he doesn't want to say anything, let him go. I'm not used to this kind of fighting scene. When the 4 young masters heard his words, they had goosebumps all over their bodies. They had seen liars before, but they had never seen someone who could lie so casually. Not used to it. Who the fuck was it that sent them flying with a single kick just now? He even crushed their elbows. If this woman hadn't appeared, they would have been in a worse state. Is that so? Hellion Vivian walked in front of the 4 young masters in confusion. She didn't know that the man standing behind her had a cold look in his eyes at that moment. It was full of warning. The 4 young masters shuddered at the same time. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Is it that scary? Although she was a little tanned, she wasn't hopelessly ugly. Why did the 4 of them look like they had seen a ghost? Chapter 147. Phut. Hellion Vivian couldn't control herself and let out a light laugh. Nangong Lai's entire body was choked. That devilishly handsome face alternated between red and white. It was enough to see how stifled he was. That's why it's best not to compete with a certain person. If you're not careful, you'll get yourself into trouble. You chose divination, and he chose martial qi. Hellion Wei stretched lazily. The dean wants us to discuss who will be the first to go on stage. It doesn't matter. Nangong Lai leaned against the pillar behind him. When his gaze swept past Belegaju's side profile, he unexpectedly raised his eyebrows. Nangong Lai didn't care, and Belegaju didn't care either. He casually stood there with his tall figure. Up to you. Hellion Vivian used to feel that she was unorganized and undisciplined. After seeing these two today, she realized that she could still be considered a good student. But, the matter of who will go first, then I'll decide. The divination will take a long time, so the divination will go first. The two of us can still sleep below. Then I will go first, and martial qi will go last. Is that okay? Hellion Vivian once again wanted to show her democracy. Nangong Lai shamelessly muttered, I also want to sleep below. Thinking about it, how cool would it be to sleep in a row during a test? Among the three of you, only you don't need physical strength. Hellion Vivian curved her lips into a smile. Do people who don't need physical strength need to sleep? Nangong Lai still didn't answer. Belegaju spoke from the other side. He doesn't need it. Continue. Nangong Lai, who said he didn't need it? His divination was the most taxing on his brain. You can sleep during the divination. Hellion Vivian was originally joking. Unexpectedly, Nangong Lai's eyes lit up. That's a good idea. Shadow, who had been listening from the side from beginning to end, had a conflicted expression. Were the three of them going there to compete or to sleep? No matter what, for the sake of the prize money, we have to win. Hellion Vivian smiled gently, bringing out the warmth of a spring breeze. And Ying was speechless. This time, he finally realized that money could make the world go round. White Academy's purpose for organizing this competition wasn't the prize money, right? Hellion Vivian added with a smile, and a wonderful holiday. Shadow. What happened to fighting for the reputation of the compound? I've heard that according to White Academy's practice over the years, all the participants from each courtyard have to practice in advance. Should we practice as well? Hellion Vivian paused for a moment before saying, practice together? Nangong Lai shook his head. He looked up at the sky and sighed, I'm too seductive when I'm divining. I'm afraid that you won't be able to hold on and will fall in love with this young master. Hee. The corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Belegaju's thin lips curved upwards. No need. 2 words. The answer he received was the same as Hellion Vivian's heart. I also feel that there's no need to practice together. Hellion Vivian stretched her body and curved her lips into a smile. If they were together, she would instead have some misgivings. As a matter of fact, the other 2 men were also the same. However, compared to Wei, they didn't want to reveal any clues related to their own identities when they were practicing. When the time comes, we'll first compete with the good compound. Hellion Vivian handed over the roll of paper that the dean gave her to them. This is the good compound's list of competitors. Best of 3 wins. In other words, if the first 2 wins, the third person won't need to go on stage. Nangong Lai heard what was said and leaned over the stone table. His face was full of regret. Chapter 148. You've been injured by someone? Nangong Lai seemed to have heard some strange news of the world. His entire person stood up and looked at Belegaju with a thick sense of disbelief. When had the Ghost Palace's 3rd prince ever been beaten? Even if he lost his martial qi, no one dared to chirp in front of him. Not because of anything else, but because this person's methods were too ruthless. So ruthless that even those people from the 4 great clans didn't dare to act blindly without thinking. Moreover, he still held grudges. He didn't like to deal with people at the moment, but he would slowly make up for it later. Those shadow guards who tried to assassinate him were an example. Don't look at how unhurried he was in Armament City. After he came back, he went to the palace once. Just that one trip made everyone from the 4 great clans and 8 great sects panic. He didn't say who sent those shadow guards. He just said that among these people, he brought up the evidence, making those people dumbstruck and speechless. They could only look on helplessly as he investigated them one by one. Every time he investigated a family, there would always be some other matter exposed. The clan leaders of the 4 great clans had no choice but to spend more money to take care of this. What they wanted was face, and they were from a prestigious family. If some things were known by the people of the capital, they would inevitably become the common people's after-dinner joke. That was simply more unbearable than letting them suffer a beating. Now they didn't even dare to go to the brothel, afraid that Third Prince would be unhappy and directly send people to block them in bed. Don't say that the cold and aloof Third Prince wouldn't do this kind of thing. So far, there were already 2 elders who had been investigated by him like this. They were investigated until they had a psychological shadow. Now they couldn't get hard in front of anyone. Thinking about it carefully, originally when they were happily doing that thing, it was the moment when the men were most enjoying and most unguarded. But at this time, a knife suddenly appeared above their heads, and there were also countless shadow guards standing in the air. They didn't touch a single hair on their bodies, only gazing at them with lingering gazes. But as long as he thought of that scene, Nangong Lai's hair stood on end. That's why he believed that this kind of man would be beaten. Even if you beat him to death, he still felt that it was impossible. There must be some conspiracy. Based on his understanding of Arju, the other party must have some conspiracy. Nangong Lai looked at his good friend's calm appearance and was about to speak. He was interrupted by Belegaju's voice. There were 4 of them against me. Is it strange that I was injured? Of course. Nangong Lai originally wanted to say that it was too strange, but after seeing his gaze, his Adam's apple couldn't help but move. He forcibly changed his tone. It's not strange, fuck. What the hell is going on? Back in the day, this man used a stick to beat back more than 100 big men. After the beating, he even said not to look for him for such things in the future, and that it was a waste of his sleeping time. Now that there were only 4 of them, they couldn't beat him? Who would believe such words? What's more, he had already recovered his martial chi. That was because he was too lazy to expand his martial chi shield. Otherwise, as long as he moved his fingers, those people would instantly lie flat on the ground. What was he pretending to be? He even injured himself. From Nangong Lai's point of view, no matter how he thought about it, that so-called injury was deliberate. When Hellion Vivian went to get something midway, he couldn't bear it anymore and asked his good friend sitting beside him in a low voice. Some were done by Hellion Vivian. Yuan Ling Xian wrinkled his thick eyebrows. That debauchee's recent actions are actually a bit unexpected. However, based on her strength, only you people from the good compound will lose. Young Master Yuan is right. When the 4 of them hung their heads, the muscles on their arms began to ache dully. Aside from being afraid of that man, there was also resentment hidden in their hearts. Young Master Yuan, you must make them suffer a bit during the competition. They even dared to move against us. They clearly don't put young Master Yuan in their eyes. Yuan Ling Xian wasn't the type of person who'd only rely on a few words to fan the flames of trouble to make his anger soar to the heavens. However, he himself found the people from the inferior compound unpleasing to the eye. Even his face carried ridicule and disdain. If they want to fight with this young master, they'll have to be able to face off against the people from the superior compound. Speaking up to here, he turned his head and sneered. They're only a few clowns. Do you think they have that ability? Chapter 149. In the past, after Yuan Ling Xian said this kind of thing, he would always hear a wave of seconding or praising. But today, those 4 were exceptionally silent. This made Yuan Ling Xian couldn't help but look at them strangely. What, do you think this young master said something wrong? Those 4 people stared blankly at first, then shook their heads with all their might, squeezing out a stiff smile. No, no, how could what young Master Yuan said be wrong? Okay, if there's nothing else, you can go back. Yuan Lingxian saw that these 4 people didn't even have their usual quick-wittedness, and immediately felt that there was no meaning. The little manservant standing by his side also knew how to look at things. Once he heard his master say this, he hurriedly led them out. When he returned, he had a smile on his face. Young master, this little one has inquired. The good compound has a strong man. Although his martial chi isn't good, he's very hard to deal with. With him there, he'll definitely be able to teach that arrogant brat a lesson. Tell that strong man to hit his face. If he does well, this young master will naturally give him some benefits. Yuan Lingxian was originally a proud and arrogant person, and was also a well-known figure in his family. Even in the capital, there weren't many people who dared to provoke him. Murong Changfeng and He Ziyi were fine. After all, no matter whether it was strength or family background, they were all people who were on par with him. It was this poor brat who popped out of nowhere who stole the limelight as soon as he entered the compound. Of course, Yuan Lingxian wasn't like that Zhong family's young master who didn't have a brain at all. When he saw this kind of person, his first reaction wasn't to teach him a lesson, but to use him for himself. He hated that he, the grand young master of the Yuan family, was actually disregarded by a poor brat. He only threw him one sentence: not interested. How could Yuan Lingxian swallow this anger? As Yuan Lingxian's personal manservant, he naturally knew about this matter, and also understood his master's thoughts. His voice became even more respectful. Young master, rest assured. Everything will be handled by this little one. Those 3 people are all top-notch trash. If they're not sleeping in class, they're taking long-term leave. If it wasn't for the inferior compound not being able to select people, the principal probably wouldn't have sent them to compete. This kind of combination won't even win one of the 3 matches, let alone the superior compound, a Chu. Helian Vivian, who was helping Huan Mingxiong sweep the floor in a corner of the commerce courtyard, sneezed heavily. She looked at the old man who was leisurely drinking tea behind her and raised her eyebrows. Elder Huan, I've already helped you with your work. The salary the academy gave you, shouldn't you give it all to me? Cough. Originally, Huan Mingxiong, who had been humming a little tune to steal half a day of leisure, didn't drink a mouthful of hot tea. He almost choked himself. Where would this old man have any employment fee? Helian Wei propped the broom on the ground and laid on it lazily. She propped up her chin with her fingers and looked at him with amusement. A dignified elder of 3 generations sweeping the floor here, and you don't get paid? Who would believe that? Little girl, you haven't dealt with that brat Tu Su before. Don't be fooled by his appearance. He's got a lot of black water in his heart. Huan Mingxiong angrily put down the teacup in his hand. If you ask this old man, that nephew of his learned from him. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. Nephew? It's that icy brat who wears a mask all day and pretends to be mature. Helian Vivian finally understood. The royal family had definitely offended Elder Huan in some way, which was why every word he said was related to his profession. Chapter 150. What our team values is freedom of expression. Helian Vivian thought for a long time before finally saying a satisfactory answer. After all, she still wanted to win. Huan Mingxiong was once again dumbstruck. Freedom of expression. In other words, they hadn't even gotten used to each other yet. They planned to face those students from the good compound tomorrow. Can you guys really win? The old man helplessly held his forehead. It wasn't that he didn't believe in this girl, but he didn't know the details of the other 2. Helian Vivian answered with confidence this time. We must win. So confident. The old man laughed loudly. Normally, this girl was always low-key. This time, she said these words. He reckoned that she had some tricks up her sleeve. Helian Vivian beamed as she nodded. Our team is different from others. What's different? Huan Mingxiong's curiosity was piqued. Helian Vivian rubbed her chin and deeply curved her thin lips. Our goal is relatively clear. Look at money and earn a lot. This time, the dean is very generous. The winner will receive 100,000 taels. Huan Ming-xiong's mouth twitched. This was the difference between their team and other teams, she said. Hehe, it really was different. He had been at White Academy for so many years, but this was the first time someone participated for the prize money. Forget it, forget it. Huan Ming-xiong laughed and sighed. Bring your deskmate over. Although this old man is old, I can still give him a few pointers. This old man can't help with divination, but here is an ancient book. You can keep it. Hellion Vivian thought about it and also felt that this was safer. After all, after the good compound, they would face the fine compound. They had to pay attention to Hei Zeddy's strength. Letting Elder Huan give pointers always had its benefits. I'll bring him over in the evening. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. He's still here. Huan Ming-xiong nodded and stroked his beard. What attribute is that deskmate of yours? What level is he now? Never asked. Hellion Vivian guessed. He should be Earth rank. Huan Ming-xiong's fingers, which were stroking his beard, suddenly froze. His eyes widened slightly. Earth rank, the lowest level? What the hell was there to compete for? He would definitely lose. Probably. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, the light in her eyes slightly brightening. Wait until evening when I bring him here. Elder Huan can talk to him alone. Huan Ming-xiong thought for a moment, then said, that's all we can do. An Earth-ranked martial artist, he had to think carefully. How many years had it been since he last saw an Earth-ranked martial artist? One couldn't blame Huan Ming-xiong for having such a reaction. One had to know that as a third-generation elder of the War Dragon Empire, aside from his influence within the imperial court, he also had great attainments in martial chi cultivation. As the leader of the battle spirit forces, he could be considered a master that everyone admired. Just as he had said, he had not come into contact with an Earth-ranked martial artist since more than 10 years ago. I still have to think about how to teach him. Elder Huan, do you really plan on teaching them? After Hellion Vivian left, a cyan silhouette appeared behind Huan Ming-xiong. Won't it be too much of a waste of time? Those students from the inferior compound, aside from this Miss Hellion, the other people's aptitudes aren't that great. That's why last time you proposed to select people from the inferior compound, that's why it wasn't accepted. Now that you've given guidance to the inferior compound students alone, won't it be unfair to the competition? Huan Ming-xiong's long beard moved slightly, his white hair floating. If an Earth-ranked new student wins the competition with just a few words of guidance from this old man, then those well-known students from the superior compound and fine compound won't be able to withstand the blow. Elder Huan's meaning is to use them to temper those selected from the superior compound. The silhouette raised his eyebrows, his face gradually showing an expression of understanding. Huan Ming-xiong faintly smiled, bringing out a mysterious immortal beauty. Hellion Vivian, this girl, has too many variables. Her appearance will definitely break the superiority feeling that has existed for so many years in the superior compound since the beginning. To tell you the truth, I'm still not satisfied with those selected students. I just want to give them a difficult problem and see whether or not they can deal with it. But this isn't just that girl's competition. There are still 2 other people. This old man must make sure that the others won't hold her back. At the very least, I have to guarantee 2 wins, and let her face off against the superior compound. But Earth-ranked martial artists. The silhouette was still somewhat uncertain. They won't be able to improve their abilities too much in the short span of one night. Huan Ming-xiong supported his forehead with his hand and sighed, do your best and leave the rest to fate. This old man only hopes that the person that the girl brings isn't a piece of wood. The sun was setting in the west, a long wind was blowing gently. White Academy, a corner of the cafeteria. In a moment, after we finish eating, come with me to a place. Hellion Vivian put down the bamboo chopsticks in her hand, looked at the man in front of her, and lazily yawned. Beligaju's posture was graceful as he used a white handkerchief to wipe the corners of his mouth. His voice was indifferent, and he only replied with one word, okay. This gave Hellion Vivian a kind of misconception. The other person must have been born in the aristocratic British royal family in his past life. Even the way he ate was so aesthetically pleasing. Compared to the posters of modern celebrities, he had even more of the demeanor of a devilish vampire. "You're not going to ask me where I'm taking you?" Hellion Vivian lightly smiled as she faced him and raised her eyebrows. Beligaju looked into her eyes and suddenly smiled. His bewitching coolness carried a deep seductive flavor. "What? Don't tell me you want to do something to me. Take liberties with her?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows, and the smile on her face became even wider. "Selling you to a small shop, you should be able to fetch a good price." Shadow, who was serving the dishes at the side, heard this, and cold sweat flowed down his back. Selling His Highness to a small shop. Did this Miss Hellion not want to live anymore? Ah! Beligaju took the teacup, and his slender fingers tapped on the surface of the cup. His eyes were filled with rumination. "It seems that the great patron is very sure of my appearance." Hellion Vivian also poured herself a cup of tea and smiled. "Of course, don't tell me you don't look in the mirror every day." "For someone like you, it's enough for people to throw away 1,000 pieces of gold." Shadow silently replied in his heart. Not only throwing away 1,000 pieces of gold, wherever His Highness went, there would be people who secretly admired him. Beligaju unhurriedly drank a mouthful of tea. After being moistened by the tea, those originally delicate thin lips became even more moist. Under the illumination of dusk, they seemed to emit a faint radiance. "It sounds like my qualifications are indeed not bad." Hellion Vivian's eyes lit up. "So you intend to engage in this industry? I can specially open a shop for you." Shadow. "Wait a minute, why is this topic becoming more and more strange?" Beligaju smiled. His left hand supported the table, and the slender fingers of his right hand clasped Hellion Vivian's chin without warning. His whole body tilted towards her direction. "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.